Chapter 391. Tonight, the imperial palace was very lively. For the first time, the ban was lifted, which meant that the banquet could go on very, very late. Yonghe Palace and Fengming Hall were actually two adjacent palaces, but they were separated from each other, so the situation on the other side could not be seen. Li Yi and Rui were led by two eunuchs from the palace gate. They had never seen the imperial palace so lively. From time to time, eunuchs would lead men and women to pass by, and the number of patrolling guards in the imperial palace was much higher than usual. The imperial palace was different from other places, where one could bring a large number of maids and guards, especially on a special occasion like tonight. Therefore, only Li Yi and Rui entered the imperial palace, while Mississippi Liu and Xiao Huan stayed at home. The two did not know any other nobles, so it was actually a little awkward on such an occasion. This was also one of the reasons why Li Yi was unwilling to attend other people's banquets, even if it was the old emperor's invitation. That place is the food bureau, which is responsible for the meals in the imperial palace. Almost all the dishes that can't be bought outside can be found there. Li Yi introduced casually to Rui. The food bureau was very busy that night, and one could see servants coming in and out at every moment. It was not easy to complete hundreds of banquets. From the food bureau to Yonghe Palace, there was almost a road formed by the servants of the imperial palace. At the end of the road, when the two were about to enter Yonghe Palace and Fengming Hall respectively, Li Yi suddenly felt something. He raised his head and saw a pair of eyes looking at him from not far away. What a coincidence, Li Xianzi. I didn't expect that we would meet again so soon. Qin Yu slowly walked over with a smile on his face. Several young men followed behind him. When they saw Li Yi, their expressions changed slightly. What happened in the King of Shu's mansion last night was still fresh in their minds. Young Duke Qin was killed by Li Xianzi. They did not expect that they would meet again after only one day. It was really a case of enemies meeting each other. Looking at Qin Yu's happy face, as if he could not suppress the joy of meeting an old friend, Li Yi began to admire him a little. A madman was indeed a madman. If it was a normal person, even if they didn't fight on the spot, they wouldn't have such a completely opposite attitude. Li Yi also had a smile on his face and said, "Yes, I didn't expect that I would have such a deep fate with young Duke Qin." Let alone Qin Yu, even the young men behind him couldn't help but be startled when they heard this. Young Duke Qin had almost chopped off his hand, and he had also made young Duke Qin suffer a lot. When the two of them met, shouldn't it be tit for tat? Shouldn't one of them die? How could it be related to fate? Madman Qin was Madman Qin. It was normal for him to do things that were beyond common sense. But what about Li Xianzi? Could it be that he was admitting defeat? If he really wanted to give in, then he was gravely mistaken. When had those who had offended young Duke Qin ever had a good ending? How could the enmity be resolved just by admitting defeat? Yes, fate is really deep. Qin Yu murmured. When he saw the woman standing beside Li Yi, a trace of amazement flashed through his eyes. After a moment of daze, the smile on his face became even more brilliant. Could this be Madame Li? The expression on his face was a little surprised, but it was just right. It seemed normal, but those who knew him knew what this expression meant. The young men looked at each other and were slightly moved. It was obvious that young Duke Qin had taken a fancy to Madame Li. Moreover, with his relationship with Li Xianzi, they were afraid that he would not give up until he achieved his goal. With his personality, if he were to do something in secret, not even Prince Li Xian would be able to stop him. Qin Yu walked 2 steps closer to Li Yi and patted him on the shoulder. With a smile on his face, he whispered in his ear, "Madame Li Xianzi is really good." Although he was smiling, his voice was incomparably cold. The young men did not know what he said and looked slightly puzzled. Rui glanced at Qin Yu. Her expression did not change, but her eyes widened and a terrifying aura emerged. Li Yi also smiled. This smile was somewhat inexplicable in the eyes of the young men, but in Qin Yu's eyes, it gave him a bad feeling. Just as this thought arose in his mind, he saw that the smile suddenly disappeared and then became incomparably cold. An afterimage rapidly enlarged in Qin Yu's eyes. The next moment, it fell on his face. The severe pain instantly drowned his consciousness. Qin Yu staggered and fell to the ground. Who do you think you are? How dare you insult His Majesty? Li Yi looked at Qin Yu and said coldly. This slap came so suddenly that the young men behind Qin Yu were dumbfounded. What the hell was going on? Why did it suddenly involve insulting His Majesty? Could it be that what young Duke Qin said in that man's ear was insulting His Majesty? That was impossible. No matter how crazy madman Qin was, he would never dare to do such a disgraceful thing. Bah! Qin Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt that a few teeth in his mouth had loosened. Half of his face had lost feeling and seemed to have swollen. He supported his body and slowly stood up. He could no longer maintain the smile on his face. He stood there and looked at Li Yi without any expression. Only a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He did not expect that the other party would dare to make a move in the palace under the watchful eyes of the public. Moreover, even if he had some skills, he had to admit that he could not have avoided that slap. Young Duke. Several young men hurriedly ran to Qin Yu's side. Seeing that half of his face was swollen like a pig's head, they immediately turned around and pointed at Li Yi. They shouted angrily, "How dare you commit murder in the palace? Guards, guards!" There would be a team of guards patrolling the palace at regular intervals. In reality, before the young man shouted, a team of guards had already trotted over. The palace was originally an important place. Tonight was a special time, so there could not be any trouble. The leader of the guards took out his weapon and a dozen people immediately surrounded the place. Quick, this person intends to assassinate young Duke Qin. Quickly arrest him. Before the leader of the guards could speak, a young man pointed at Li Yi and shouted. The leader of the guards naturally did not believe that it was an assassination. No one dared to do so in the palace. Moreover, the person he pointed at did not even have a weapon. As for young Duke Qin. Hiss, that slap was really ruthless. It was only a fight between the playboys. This was very normal. The leader of the guards quickly relaxed. What happened? The next moment, he asked with a serious face. He was a palace guard. Even if the other party was the young duke, he did not need to care. If the conflict between the two could not be resolved, he would simply arrest them and leave them for His Majesty to deal with. Didn't you see? He wants to assassinate young Duke Qin. Quickly arrest him. The people around Qin Yu were also children of influential families. Although their families could not compare to the Qin family, to be able to appear here, they would not be too inferior. When facing the leader of the guards, they were completely bossy. Qin Yu publicly insulted His Majesty. Does he not deserve to be beaten? Li Yi looked at the few people and said lightly. Nonsense. When did the young duke insult His Majesty? Why did we not hear it? You are simply framing him. Hearing this, the leader of the guards glanced at Li Yi. He thought that this person was not someone to be trifled with. If this crime of great disrespect was carried out, not only would young Duke Qin's beating be in vain, there might be other troubles. However, although young Duke Qin was notorious, he still had a relationship with Prime Minister Qin. Even the leader of the guards did not want to offend him too much. With a serious face, he was about to speak to another young man when the young man took out a token from his sleeve and waved it in front of the leader's eyes. He said, "Tell me, just because he is young Duke Qin, he can insult His Majesty." Seeing that token, the leader of the guards was startled. His expression immediately became solemn and he said in a deep voice, "Sir, the crime of great disrespect cannot be committed by anyone." Chapter 392. The young men in front of Qin Yu didn't see clearly what had happened, but the guard leader's attitude suddenly changed. Did he forget that the person standing in front of him was young Duke Qin? Li Yi had only heard about the function of this token from the old eunuch Changda, but he didn't expect it to be so useful. No wonder he had such a disdainful expression when he said that he could make a scene in the capital. This token was really a good thing for this guard to treat Qin Yu's grandson like this. "Young Duke Qin, this is the imperial palace. Please be careful with your words and actions." The guard leader warned Qin Yu with a sullen face. He didn't take any drastic action. After all, this young man with the intelligence division token could ignore Qin Yu, but he couldn't ignore him. "You." A young man in front of Qin Yu was about to speak angrily, but Qin Yu patted him on the shoulder and walked forward. He looked at Li Yi, cupped his fists, and said calmly, "I admire you, I admire you. People always say that I, Qin Yu, am a madman, but it turns out that Li Xianzi and I are the same kind of people." "No, no, no." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm not as abnormal as young Duke Qin. I admit that I underestimated you." Qin Yu spat out another mouthful of blood and squinted at Li Yi. "Don't worry, it won't happen again. We will meet again soon." "Is this a threat?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. "What do you think?" Although half of Qin Yu's face was swollen, he still squeezed out a strange smile. "If that's the case." Li Yi sighed and used his true qi to slap the other half of Qin Yu's face. He said coldly, "Young Duke Qin, how can you insult His Majesty again?" This time, Qin Yu directly fell to the ground, and several teeth even flew out of his mouth. He could no longer laugh, nor could he speak, because he had already fainted. Although there was only a trace of true qi in Li Yi's body, if it was channeled to a specific part of his body, it could explode with extraordinary power. The young men were dumbfounded. How could he play such a trick in front of so many people? Did they really think that the imperial guards were blind? One of them pointed at the leader of the guards and said, Look, he slandered young Duke Qin just like that. Did you see that?" The guard leader's face stiffened. He roughly understood what had just happened. In Jingdo, there truly were people who acted even more arrogantly than Duke Qin. Duke Qin, who had never been at a disadvantage, had no power to retaliate in front of him. "The few of you, bring young Duke Qin away." He waved his hand at the other guards and instructed. Before the other young men could open their mouths, they were glared at by the leader of the guards. Then, he smiled bitterly at the young man and said, "Sir, even if you don't give Duke Qin face, you still have to give Prime Minister Qin face. Otherwise, it will be hard to explain to His Majesty." To be able to take out that token meant that he was one of the Emperor's people. Who knew if this matter had the Emperor's intentions? Thus, the leader of the guard's attitude was very polite. Li Yi waved his hand. The two slaps just now were already very satisfying. He couldn't kill that disgusting guy here. Without even looking at Qin Yu, he turned and left with Rui. The leader of the guards let out a sigh of relief. As long as it didn't involve that special place or those special people, the matter would always be easily resolved. As for what young Duke Qin wanted to do in the future, that was his own business. "You guys, be gentler." The other nobles finally realized that there seemed to be some inside story that they didn't know about. They didn't dare to be arrogant anymore and followed closely behind the guards. That person didn't even care about young Duke Qin, so why would he care about them? Is he that young Duke Qin? The two of them walked side by side. Rui asked softly as she walked. Li Yi nodded. Rui also knew what happened last night. It had to be said that although the 2 slaps just now still made his palms a little numb, he was really happy in his heart, so much so that his mood became a lot better. He was not a generous person and was not used to holding grudges in his heart. It was best if he could take revenge on the spot. If he couldn't do it on the spot, he would do it as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would always keep it in his heart. It was suffocating. Rui said softly, I also feel that he is not a good person. When others said, not a good person, it was just a statement or ridicule. But whether it was said by Rui or Rui, it had another meaning. Although Rui was usually gentle and demure, if one really counted, she had killed many people, even far more than Mississippi Liu. In the early years, she had killed all the outlaws wanted by the government. In her opinion, Qin Yu might not be much different from them. What took you so long? A familiar voice came from the front. Li Yi looked up and saw Li Xian walking over quickly. Hello, sister-in-law. He first cupped his hands and bowed to Rui, then looked at Li Yi and asked, I saw Qin Yu pass by here. You didn't see him, did you? I saw him. Li Yi nodded and said. He didn't say anything. Li Xian asked doubtfully. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, I don't think, he didn't. Li Xian shook his head, thinking that this was the imperial palace. Even if Qin Yu had 10 times the guts, he wouldn't dare to do anything here. He put this matter to the back of his mind and said, I have a new idea. After saying this, he turned his head and looked at the woman behind him, saying, Qin heir, you and sister-in-law go to Her Highness' place first. When the banquet is over, we will go find you. The princess nodded and walked to Rui's side. She very naturally held her hand and smiled, saying, Sister, let's go in first. This is the princess, Li Xian's wife. Rui had never seen the princess before, so Li Yi introduced her to her. Rui nodded and said, Then we will go first. Seeing the 2 walk into the Phoenix Cry Palace, Li Xian couldn't wait to pull Li Yi in the direction of Yonghe Palace. As they walked, he said, I have a new idea. As long as there is an open ground, it will be fine. We don't need to jump down from a high place, but we can fly higher and it will be easier to control. This method seems to be more suitable on the battlefield. You want to use a galloping horse as a driving force to pull the kite up? Li Yi casually asked. Li Xian's footsteps stopped and a sense of defeat immediately appeared on his face. He then looked at Li Yi bitterly and asked, Do you know why you didn't tell me earlier? Do you know how long it took me to think of this? Li Yi couldn't bear to hurt him and said, I just thought of it. To be able to think of this, you are already very amazing. Chapter 393. When it came to Li Xian, Li Yi had always adhered to the principle of, if you don't ask, I won't tell. If you tell, I'll tell. With Li Xian's perpetually high curiosity signal, all he had to do was throw a few modern physics textbooks at him, and he would be deeply engrossed in it. This guy even called her, Qin, just now. It seemed that the strategy of consort was very effective. He couldn't bring him back to that path of no return. Li Xian's frustration only lasted for a moment before he put it to the back of his mind. He began to discuss with Li Yi how his idea should be implemented and the various details. He even took out an intricate drawing from his sleeve. The 2 of them sat at a table in the corner and discussed in low voices. The old emperor's banquet was held in Yonghe Palace. However, a small palace couldn't accommodate so many people. To ensure that there was enough space, the palace was filled with short tables that extended all the way to the open space outside the palace. Those who didn't have the status to enter the palace could only sit in the open space outside the palace. Even so, it was still a great honor for them. Li Yi could be considered to have a small status now. If he were to be ranked, he would at least be able to occupy a small spot in the palace. At this time, the banquet hadn't officially started and the emperor hadn't arrived yet. Many of the officials were like him and Li Xian, chatting and laughing in low voices. With nothing to do, Li Yi's gaze fell on the drawing that Li Xian had spread on the table. After a moment of shock, he said, "This drawing was drawn by you. I haven't seen you for a few days, and you've improved a lot." Although Li Yi, who was from an engineering background, had forgotten all his previous professional knowledge, drawing was a basic ability that he had not lost until now. Especially after studying drawing, his level was several levels higher than before. The drawings that Li Xian drew in the past could only be called concept drawings. They were ugly beyond belief. It had only been a few days since they last met, but he was able to draw such a neat drawing that it looked like a work of art. How could this improvement be described with the word fast? Li Xian laughed dryly and said, "Of course I didn't draw this. Qin is skilled in the art of painting, so I asked her to draw it for me." Li Yi shook his head. Qin and Qin were so intimate. It was really not easy for His Highness to be enlightened in this aspect. From the perspective of a friend, Li Yi felt very gratified. Finally, he didn't have to worry about his sexual orientation or whether he would have designs on him. Li Xian was the crown prince and was highly valued by the emperor, so his seat was naturally not next to Li Yi's. However, a fifth-ranked official next to Li Yi had been kicked off somewhere by Li Xian, so he naturally occupied the other's seat. "How much do you know about Qin Yu?" Li Yi casually asked. Li Xian furrowed his brows and said, "This person is a complete scoundrel, or perhaps a madman. He does things without any rules, like a mad dog. When he's angry, he doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. If it was just him, naturally no one would be afraid of him, but with the addition of Prime Minister Qin's manner, there aren't many people in the capital who are willing to offend him." Li Yi asked again, "In the entire capital, is there really no one who can control him?" Li Xian shook his head and said, "That's not the case. The problem is that although Qin Yu is arrogant, it's only because he doesn't cultivate morality. He doesn't touch the interests of the nobles. Out of respect for Prime Minister Qin, very few people are willing to meddle in his affairs. On the other hand, Prime Minister Qin is very strict with him. Every time he causes trouble, he will be grounded at home for a period of time. However, after he is released, he is still the same. To tell the truth, when it comes to that mad dog, even I don't want to have anything to do with him." Li Xian looked at him and said, "However, you don't have to worry. His methods are useless on you. Furthermore, with his personality, he didn't say or do anything just now. It's clear that he doesn't care about you." In Li Xian's view, the person who offended Qin Yu the most last night was himself. The person Qin Yu hated the most was presumably him. This was also the reason why he made a move. He didn't do anything. Li Yi smiled and said, "It's just that I slapped him twice just now, knocked out a few of his teeth, and knocked him unconscious." Li Xian looked at him. The host of tonight's banquet was, of course, the old emperor. In reality, as long as it was in the Jing kingdom, no matter the occasion, he was the only host. However, tonight, in addition to Emperor Jing who was shining as always, there was another person who was also shining brightly. It was a middle-aged man with a thin face. He was not tall and was sitting in front of the generals. Even when Emperor Jing praised him in front of all the civil and military officials, he still had a solemn expression on his face. It seemed that he was out of tune with the atmosphere of tonight's banquet. However, no one thought that he was abnormal because he was the most serious person in the Jing kingdom. Because he was Su Dingyuan, the god of war of the Jing kingdom. It was also the first time that Li Yi saw this legendary general. However, because he was a little far away, he could only see a silhouette and could not see what he looked like. Fortunately, he was not curious about the god of war's appearance. Instead, he was more interested in the singing and dancing in the middle of the hall. The standard of the court musicians and dancers was not just for show. As the king of a country, he definitely wanted to keep the best things in the palace. These entertainment programs were many times more professional than what Li Yi had seen in the brothel. Li Xian clearly didn't have the same level of appreciation. At this moment, he was still muttering, with that madman's personality, "You guys won't rest until you're dead. Who knows what that madman will do? Why don't you just kill him secretly?" Li Xian turned to look at Li Yi and said, "You have a lot of evil ideas. Think about how to kill him secretly. That guy, once he is dead, everything will be over. Your Highness, who do you want to kill? Do you need my help?" A rough voice came from behind. Li Xian was shocked and quickly turned his head. When he saw the old man in luxurious clothes standing behind him, he smiled awkwardly and said, "General Shui, you misheard me. I am the supervisor. How could I do that kind of thing? Looks like this old man is getting old. My ears aren't as good." The white-haired old man with a ruddy complexion laughed and said, "This is General Shui." To cover up his embarrassment, Li Xian hurriedly introduced him to Li Yi. He only said this because he believed that Li Yi must have heard of General Shui's name. If General Su Dingyuan was the current god of war of the Jing kingdom, then before him, this title had always belonged to the old man in front of him. As long as it was a citizen of the Jing kingdom, who had not heard of his name. Even General Su was a student taught by him. General Shui. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. When he regained his senses, he immediately stood up and said, "Greetings, old General Shui. Ah, old Shui, let's see what you can brag about in the future. What do you mean by the national general that everyone knows in the Jing kingdom? I have never heard of your name." Another burst of laughter came from behind. Soon, a few figures walked in front of the three of them. General Shui, who had spoken earlier, now had a face as black as the bottom of a pot. There was a hint of shame and anger on his face as he stared at Li Yi with his bell-like eyes and said loudly, "Boy, have you really not heard of my name?" Chapter 394. He was indeed a general. Although the old man was old, his body was still strong. Although his eyes were as big as copper bells, he did not look imposing. However, Li Yi did not understand. He was not born and raised in this world, so how would he know the name of this old general? He was not Shui Rengui or Shui Jiqin. It was not strange that he did not know his name since he had never heard of his stories or songs. The moonlight tonight is not bad. Old General Shui, please have a seat. I'll go out and look at the moon for a while. Excuse me." Li Yi cleverly changed the topic. He did not want to embarrass the old general or himself. Ha 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 ha. The people behind General Shui laughed even louder. They also felt that this young man was too ignorant for not knowing Shui Wanqing's name. After all, for a young man of his age, he should have heard of this name since he was a child. However, being able to personally witness the most arrogant fellow among them being humiliated made them feel rather delighted. "This is General Shui Wanqing." Li Xian reminded him in a low voice. There was only one General Shui in the Jing kingdom. If Li Yi did not know him, he could not do anything about it. "Ah, it's General Shui." Li Yi revealed an expression of sudden realization and hurriedly said, "Old General Shui, please don't blame me. This is the first time I've attended a banquet of this level, so I was a little nervous and didn't remember. Old General Shui's name is really well known. I've heard of your deeds since I was young. To be able to meet you today is really the honor of 3 lifetimes." Who didn't know how to say polite words? From the looks of it, this old general was really a celebrity. In order to express the joy and excitement of a fan meeting his idol, Li Yi felt that he had used all the acting skills he had learned in 2 lifetimes. If it was not for the fact that autographs were not popular in this era, he could have acted more realistically. "Oh, then why don't you tell me what I've done?" The old man stroked his beard and seemed to have accepted Li Yi's explanation. After all, there were not many people in this generation who had not heard of his name. He casually asked another question. A black line appeared on Li Yi's face once again. Was this old man looking for an awkward situation? He suddenly laughed again and looked out of the hole. He praised, "The moon tonight is really nice." Old General Shui exerted some force and pulled a few strands of beard from his chin. Li Yi and Li Xian were surrounded by a group of generals. "I say, was Tian Fa really created by you?" The famous General Shui sat in front of Li Yi and said as he tore apart a juicy chicken leg. Li Yi didn't dare to say that the reason the drumstick was still there was because he had accidentally dropped it on the ground. Hearing his words, Li Yi glanced at the old emperor's seat and didn't say a word. Even if Li Xian asked him about this, he would not be able to get any useful information. Hearing the two words, divine punishment, Li Xian's spirit was clearly aroused. He hurriedly pricked up his ears to listen. "Not bad, kid. Remember, you can't tell anyone except His Majesty." General Shui nodded and said with satisfaction. But after he said that, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "That thing belongs to the military. Although we don't know the formula, the old guys here know better than anyone else how many things it can contain and how many people it can kill. You don't have to hide it." Only then did Li Yi realize that the people present were the most senior group of people in the Jin Kingdom's military. Other than the formula that the emperor would not tell them, there was no way he could hide anything else from them. Since that was the case, there was nothing to worry about. Li Yi said straightforwardly, "That's right. That thing was created by me." "Well done." Another old general patted his knee and did not hide the admiration on his face. His Majesty is becoming more and more stingy, but he is only rewarded with a Viscount title. Another old general ridiculed him and asked, "I heard that horseshoes were also created by you." "I think so. The method to save people on the battlefield was also created by you." "Maybe," Li Yi thought to himself. A general was indeed a general. Even his words were so direct. The words, created, and created were too crude. Think about it. Do you want to train in the military for a few years? General Shui stared at him with shining eyes and said, "Such a good seedling, it would be a pity not to put you in the military. With you, there will be fewer soldiers sacrificed. I will let Ding Yuan teach you personally. Who knows, maybe in a few years, the Jin Kingdom will have the youngest general in history." Li Yi's eyelids twitched. It was already scary enough to be an official in the imperial court. What would happen if he were to enter the military? How long would it take to see Rui if he had to face a bunch of rough men every day? Moreover, who would be willing to be taught by that stern face? He rejected old General Shui's suggestion without even thinking about it. When he habitually looked at the moon outside the hall, General Shui impatiently waved his hand and said, "Stop looking. There is no moon tonight." Li Yi retracted his gaze and picked up the teacup on the table. He carefully examined it and could not help but exclaim, "The workmanship of this cup is really exquisite. I wonder where it was made." General Shui's face darkened and said, "Just like what His Majesty said, you are a little kid. You are so young, but you are so ambitious. How many people have begged for it, but you do not care? Are you planning to be a lousy county magistrate for the rest of your life? Ah, what material are these chopsticks made of? Don't tell me they are made of jade. This is the palace after all." Even chopsticks are so luxurious. The few old generals looked at each other speechlessly. They knew that their plan to recruit him into the military was going to fail. Horseshoes, heavenly punishment, and even the method to save the injured soldiers. Every one of these matters was extremely important to them. If such a person could not be used by the military, even the heavens would not allow it. When they first made this request to His Majesty had said that as long as they could get his consent, he could be trained in the military. They thought that it would be a simple matter if they worked together. Who would have thought that when faced with old Shui's straightforward recruitment, he would actually study the teacup and chopsticks? No matter how much they had prepared, it was useless in this situation. If it was someone else, they would not care so much. They would first kidnap him into the military. Once there, His Majesty's words would not be of any use. However, His Majesty had clearly said that they were not to force this young man in front of them. If they did not force him, they would not know where to start. Even when they were surrounded by the enemy, the few old generals had not had such a headache. Chapter 395. Forget it, forget it. If you don't want to go to the army, I won't force you. But remember, if you encounter any problems in the future, you can come to us old fellows. Let's not talk about other things, but we can protect you in the capital. Just as Li Yi was about to go against his conscience and praise the table in front of him for being rare, old General Shui seemed to have given up and finally waved his hand. There's still one thing that I don't understand. Li Yi finally regained his composure as he looked at old General Shui. You want to ask us why we old fellows are so nice to you? Old General Shui asked without even lifting his head. Li Yi thought to himself that these old generals weren't as rash and boorish as they appeared to be. Their words and actions were clear and logical, and they could even think of things that he couldn't think of. After all, they were old men who had lived for decades and were older than both of Li Yi's lifetimes combined. They could see through Li Yi's thoughts with a single glance. The old fox had grown into an old fox. When he met these old generals or old men in the future, he must not underestimate them. You'll understand when you actually arrive on the battlefield, old General Shui said faintly as a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. No one knew better than these old generals how powerful the thing he had invented was on the battlefield. Which of the old generals present hadn't killed their way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood? They had experienced countless battles in their lives. Without them, the Jing kingdom wouldn't have existed. In every battle, it was their brothers and comrades who sacrificed themselves. The family of generals had been on the decline since ancient times. No one knew when or where a descendant of the family of generals would die on the battlefield. The young man in front of them had given them a huge gift, a huge gift. Compared to this huge gift, a small repayment was not worth mentioning at all. It was just that Li Yi hadn't realized this yet. As he watched the old generals leave, Li Xian immediately cast an envious gaze over. For old General Shui to say such words, it means that he really values you. With so many old generals standing behind you, you can do whatever you want in the capital city in the future. Li Xian was really envious. These old generals had fought for the country all their lives. Their fathers, themselves, and their descendants had all done their best for the country. What they did was the most dangerous and important thing. Because of this, His Majesty attached great importance to the family of generals. It could even be said that he favored them. In the capital, these old generals were unreasonable existences. Even if Li Xian met them, he would have to be respectful. Li Yi inexplicably received the old general's promise. Apart from feeling surprised, he was also happy. He looked at Li Xian and asked, "Walk sideways. Does that mean that the next time I meet the king of Shu, I can slap him hard?" Li Xian was stunned for a moment. It took him a while to react. He shook his head and said, "The king of Shu is a prince. His face is the face of the royal family. If you slap him, you will be slapping the royal family. The king of Shu will not forgive you, and neither will Uncle Huang." "Is that so?" Li Yi couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Other than slapping the king of Shu, he didn't seem to have anything else that he wanted to do but couldn't. Then he thought of something and asked, "What about killing Qin Yu?" When Li Xian heard this, he immediately became interested. He whispered, "That's possible, but you have to do it secretly. Don't get caught. Prime Minister Qin isn't someone to be trifled with. If something really happens, even Uncle Huang won't be able to protect us. In short, this matter can't be done hastily. We have to plan it carefully. Just as Li Yi and Li Xian were discussing how to kill Madman Qin without being discovered, on the other side of the hall, Prime Minister Qin was chatting with a few other officials. Then, he walked back to his seat, looked around the hall, and furrowed his brows. At this moment, a young man hurriedly came from behind and said, "Grandfather Qin, it's bad. Young Duke Qin, what did this bastard do this time?" After a moment, Prime Minister Qin frowned and looked in a certain direction at the entrance of the hall. "I think it's a good idea to hire someone to kill Qin Yu. Qin Yu doesn't have many guards. If we hire a powerful assassin with a lot of money, we can make him disappear forever. Even if we are caught, they won't be able to find out our identities. Qin Yu has too many enemies, and there are too many people who want him dead." Li Xian felt that he had come up with a brilliant idea. In his complacency, he raised his voice. However, he didn't notice that an official dressed in a scarlet official's robe was already dumbfounded. Through his idea, Li Yi summed up 18 ways for young Duke Qin to die. He inadvertently raised his head and seemed to see someone looking in his direction. When he looked carefully, he only saw the figures of a few unfamiliar officials. The feeling just now seemed to have never appeared. He shook his head and began to think about other things. He had Li Xian to accompany him here, so he had someone to talk to. He didn't know how Rui was doing. Young princess was born in a rich family and should not have much in common with her. He didn't know if she would be bored. The hall was full of singing and dancing, and it seemed that no one was paying attention to this side. Li Yi sneaked out. He had just stepped out of the hall and walked a few steps when he heard a faint voice behind him. "Even if Qin Yu has offended you in some way, isn't it too heavy for the county magistrate of Chang'an?" Li Yi looked back and saw an old man in plain clothes standing behind him. The old man said calmly. The old man's clothes were very ordinary, and his appearance was even more ordinary. Only his eyes were particularly sharp, as if they could see through people's hearts at a glance. "Prime Minister Qin." Li Yi stopped and looked at the old man. The old man didn't admit or deny it. After a moment, Li Yi smiled and said, "Prime Minister Qin, you know what kind of person Qin Yu is. I think you have a conclusion in your mind whether I was heavy or not. Why do you say this?" The old man frowned slightly. He was a righteous man. If others had done those things, he would have already stopped them. However, when it involved the only legitimate son of the Qin family, he naturally couldn't treat him as an ordinary person. When he made a mistake, he could punish him however he wanted. In fact, he had always been strict with Qin Yu at home. However, he didn't want to let outsiders do these things for him. Li Yi didn't defend himself. He directly tore apart all the concealment and went straight to his heart. As the Prime Minister, he must know better than anyone else what was right or wrong, right or wrong. This bastard. Prime Minister Qin cursed in his heart. Naturally, he thought of some dirty things and thought that maybe he should discipline him well. Otherwise, the reputation that the Qin family had accumulated for decades would be ruined in his hands. However, being questioned by a young man in his face, Prime Minister Qin still felt a little embarrassed. He snorted coldly, turned around, and walked back in. Li Yi curled his lips. This old man still cared about his face. His impression in Li Yi's heart slightly increased by 0.01 points. He didn't know if the Empress's birthday banquet was over. He walked out of the hall and took a look. No one came out, so it should still be in progress. When he was about to sneak back, he suddenly stopped and saw a small figure sitting on the corner of the steps of Yonghe Palace in the night. Chapter 396. Li Yi walked over slowly. The palace maids and eunuchs guarding Princess Yongning looked up and bowed slightly to him. they didn't stop him. In this world, among all the people the little princess had met, only this young county magistrate wouldn't make her feel repulsed. Li Yi sat down next to her. Princess Yongning looked back and then turned back to look at the lights in front of her. There was no expression on her little face. Li Yi looked at her eyes carefully. Even in the dark, there was light in them, but there was no life in them. He had seen closed and depressed eyes before, and they seemed to be different from the eyes in front of him. This made Li Yi feel that the situation wasn't that bad. It seemed that she just didn't want to talk to people. Of course, this was something to be happy about. Li Yi sat for a while, then stood up and walked into the hall. The little girl's face was slightly tilted at an unnoticeable angle. The light in her eyes dimmed slightly. She grabbed the hem of her robe a little harder, then quickly loosened it. After a while, she stood up and prepared to walk to the palace in the distance. It was dark and quiet there. She wouldn't go there unless she was sleeping. "Are you leaving?" A familiar voice suddenly came from behind. She stopped in her tracks and slowly turned around. Li Yi had a chicken leg in his mouth and 2 plates in his hands. He put them on the well-lit steps. "Hurry up, hurry up." He waved at Li Xian, who was also holding something in his hands. Although Li Xian's eyes were puzzled, he still put the things on the steps. "Okay, put the things down and you can go back." "Oh right, see if there's any grape wine on the table." Forget it, wine is still wine." "I don't need it." Li Yi waved his hand and said to him. Li Xian didn't care about Li Yi's behavior. Instead, he was surprised by the way Li Yi acted. He looked at Princess Yongning in surprise and turned to leave. "Do you want some?" Li Yi handed a pair of chopsticks to the little girl. When he was sitting inside, he actually didn't have much appetite. He wasn't interested in even the most exquisite dishes. Instead, he felt that eating on the steps outside was more atmosphere, mainly because it was quiet. There wouldn't be Li Xian nagging by his ear, and there wouldn't be those old generals bothering him. Princess Yongning didn't speak. Until now, Li Yi hadn't heard her say even a word. "I have to leave for a while," Li Yi said as he ate. "So, we might not see each other for a long time. When I come back, I'll treat you to a good meal." Yongning only lowered her head to eat and did not respond to Li Yi's words. Li Yi was already used to this kind of silence. Seeing that she liked to eat the dish next to him, he switched the dish next to her. Then he put down his chopsticks and quietly looked at the palace wall in the distance. From time to time, there would be some noise coming from inside the palace. In the distance, there was a tall palace wall that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was like a cage, causing people to involuntarily have a suffocating feeling. At this time, Li Yi thought of something he hadn't thought of for a long time. He had been here for half a year. What was the other world like? Forgetting was human nature. Except for a few people, no one remembered who he was. When he first came to this world, he would think about how to go back almost every day. It had been a long time since he had thought about this. At this moment, he did not immerse himself in such emotions for long, because people started coming out of the palace behind him. The banquet was over. Li Yi stood up and waved to the little girl. "See you next time." When he walked outside, a middle-aged palace maid came over and begged, "I hope you can come to the palace often to see the little princess." "It's not easy for the little princess." Li Yi looked at her and nodded. He looked back at the little girl sitting on the steps and walked to Li Xian, who was waving at him. Just as he disappeared behind a wall, Princess Yongning stood up. Several eunuchs and palace maids hurried over and led her to the depths of the palace. As if it had been planned, the banquet of the old emperor and empress ended at the same time. When Li Yi and Li Xian walked to the front of the Phoenix Cry Palace, they saw the women coming out of the palace. There were quite a few people waiting outside the hall like them. After all, many of the people who came to the imperial palace tonight were husband and wife. Li Yi and Li Xian waited until almost everyone had left before the figures of the crown princess and Rui appeared in their line of sight. To be more accurate, it was not 2 people, but 3. When Li Yi saw the woman and Rui walking side by side, his body shook. Surprise and astonishment flashed across his face. Then, his expression became extremely complicated. How could it be her? Although she was about the same age as his aunt, the last time he saw her, she had only been in her early 20s. Now, she was so haggard, particularly from the white hair occasionally peeking out from her temples. It was difficult to imagine what she had experienced during this period of time. If there were people in Jingdo that Li Yi did not want to face, Qin Yu would not be in the top 10, and the old emperor would not be first. This young lady of the Qin family was the one he did not want to see the most. Since he had accepted Li Yi's identity, when he met this young lady of the Qin family, he could not help but feel guilty. Normal people would not be able to understand this kind of feeling. Even if the original owner of this body was still alive, he would not be able to understand the conflicting and complicated feelings in his heart. It was nothing, don't worry about it. When Rui walked over, she was still smiling and talking to the woman. The woman only smiled. When she saw a certain figure standing not too far away, her body trembled slightly, and a hint of excitement flashed in her eyes. Soon after, she seemed to have thought of something, and that hint of excitement quickly disappeared, replaced by a hint of pain. My husband and Li Xianzi are already waiting for us there. The crown princess smiled and looked at the woman. I don't know if your family has come. We will be leaving first. The woman nodded and then raised her head to look at Li Yi. She said, your wife is very good. You know my husband. Rui looked at her with some surprise and asked. This time, the woman did not reply. She walked forward on her own and quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. Husband, this. Rui looked at the woman's departing figure and then looked at Li Yi. Her heart was filled with confusion. It's a long story. We will talk about it when we get back. Li Yi sighed and felt inexplicably suffocated in his heart. Seeing such a story in an opera would not be able to move people much. However, when it really happened in front of his eyes and he saw the change of the woman in just a few days, from her beautiful face to her old face, from her fine black hair to her white hair, Li Yi could only sigh in his heart and curse his sins. Li Minghan, you are a mother ** king bastard. In the end, he could not help but curse in a low voice. Who is a bastard? Li Xian turned his head to look at Li Yi in confusion. He thought that even Qin Yu had not been scolded like this. It seemed that the person he cursed just now must have offended him greatly. Chapter 397. Just now, a palace maid dropped a tray and almost hit that lady. I happened to be next to her, so I just happened to help her. Later, she took the initiative to tell me many things about the capital. Does my husband know that lady? In the carriage, Rui told Li Yi about what had just happened. Li Yi sighed. There was no need to hide this matter from Rui. He told her the cause and effect of the matter from beginning to end. Something like this happened? Rui was shocked. She didn't expect that the lady she got along well with just now would have such a grudge against the Li family, and it even involved her late father-in-law. This was the first time she heard about the past, so she felt a little sad. She felt that the lady was too pitiful, but she didn't curse like Mississippi Lu. Seeing that Li Yi seemed to be a little depressed, she quickly comforted him. My husband, you don't need to blame yourself too much. After all, you weren't born at that time. It's not your fault. Seeing her like this, I still feel a little sad, Li Yi said. Because my husband is a good person. Rui smiled and said, even if this didn't happen to us, my husband would still feel bad. Li Yi shook his head. Li Minghan had already passed away, so this matter had become a dead knot that couldn't be untied. Even if he felt a little guilty, he couldn't do anything about it. He drove this thought out of his mind, looked down at Rui, and revealed an evil smile. He whispered, "Whether your husband is a good person or not, you'll know tonight." Rui was stunned when she heard this. Then, she seemed to think of something, and her pretty face began to burn. "Our Qin family's face has been completely lost because of you." In the Qin family, a middle-aged man in a brocade robe pointed at Qin Yu, who was sitting in the hall, and said angrily, "How can the Qin family lose face for me?" Both sides of Qin Yu's face were still swollen, making him look quite miserable. Facing the middle-aged man's reprimand, he didn't mind it at all. He picked up the teacup beside him and took a sip. You unfilial son, what did you say?" The veins on the middle-aged man's forehead bulged as he strode over. He raised his hand, but when he saw Qin Yu's swollen cheek, he didn't lower his hand. "Enough." Qin Xiang, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. He looked at Qin Yu with disappointment and said, "Recently, there has been a storm in the imperial court. Our Qin family has also been involved. You'd better restrain yourself." Qin Xiang didn't say anything about Qin Yu's injury. He subconsciously thought that his grandson had done something shameless again. If this matter was blown out of proportion, he was afraid that it would be even more difficult to clean up. After this incident, it might not be a bad thing for him to restrain himself a little and be fearful of him. Restrain. A sarcastic smile appeared on Qin Yu's face as he said, "When you killed my mother in front of me, did you ever think of restraining yourself?" "Unfilial son, what did you say?" The middle-aged man's body shook when he heard this. He fiercely slammed the table next to him and grabbed Qin Yu's collar. His eyes looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. "What? Did I say something wrong?" The sarcastic expression on Qin Yu's face became even stronger. He didn't fear the middle-aged man at all, even if the other party was his father. The faces of several core members of the Qin family in the hall suddenly changed. They were also one of the participants in that incident, so how could they not remember? The Qin family's scholarly family valued reputation and chastity the most. How could a woman who didn't abide by the rules of a woman become the first wife of the Qin family? A family's shame shouldn't be aired in public. That incident couldn't be made public, and it also couldn't tarnish the Qin family's reputation. So, including the head of the family at that time, they strangled the woman to death in front of the Qin family's ancestors. However, who would have thought that Qin Yu, who was only 8 years old at that time, was hiding under the table in front of him and watching his mother being strangled to death by his father with his grandfather and uncle standing to the side. This matter had almost become a taboo in the Qin family. At this time, when Qin Yu brought it up again, everyone felt that they had lost face. Because of Qin Yu, the Qin family had lost face in front of outsiders many times. Qin Xiang closed his eyes, and the blue veins on the back of his skinny hand constantly pulsed. After a long time, he squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. "Qin Yu is grounded at home for half a year. Without my permission, he is not allowed to take a step out of the Qin family." After saying this, he slowly stood up and quickly disappeared from the hall with the help of an old servant. Everyone, including the middle-aged man, after glancing at Qin Yu, also stood up and left. Qin Yu reached out and touched his cheek. Because of the pain, the corners of his mouth twitched instinctively. He said with some regret, "Half a year, it's really a bit long. It's not easy for an interesting person to appear in the capital. What a pity, what a pity." Ah! Early in the morning in the Viscount's mansion, a servant girl suddenly screamed from a room. Hearing the sound, the housekeeper, Uncle Li, frowned and reprimanded, "Why are you screaming so early in the morning? If you disturb the young master and young madam, you will lose your reward for this month." "Li, Uncle Li, Lord Ju, he." The servant girl stood at the door and stammered as she handed a letter to housekeeper Li. a letter from the young master. A trace of doubt appeared on Uncle Lee's face as he quickly opened the letter. After a moment, the expression on his face changed to one of astonishment and shock. Not long after, the entire Viscount's mansion was completely in an uproar. While the Viscount's mansion was in chaos, Lee stood on the deck, basking in the sun and enjoying the warm wind. Looking at the vast river, he felt every pore on his body open up. The honeymoon plan and Rui had been in preparation for a long time. Finally, this morning, while everyone was still in bed, the two of them sneaked out of the house and experienced the feeling of eloping. Thinking about how furious Mississippi Lou would be when they sneaked out, he couldn't help but smile. It was just that it was wrong to hide it from Xiao Huan. She might be sad for a few days, and it was inevitable that her imagination would run wild. If he didn't coax her when he got back, it would be fine. Little girls are the most foolish and easy to fool. At this time, it would be great if there was a glass of iced grape wine, Lee murmured. If he could enjoy the river breeze, drink wine, and recite a few lines of poetry, it would be very coquettish. The river flows beyond the heaven and earth, the mountains are in the void. The great river flows east, the waves wash away all the heroes of the ages, the lonely sail is far away in the blue sky, only. What is this river called again? Suddenly, a slender hand reached out from the side, two slender fingers holding a wine glass. The glass was clear and transparent, exuding a familiar intoxicating smell. If it wasn't his favorite grape wine, what else could it be? He subconsciously took the wine glass, and the next moment, Xiao Huan's soft voice came over. "Young master, we can't find ice on the boat, so we can only make do." It was fine if he couldn't find ice, but it was good enough to have wine. His little maid was the most considerate, always delivering what he needed the most at the critical moment. As Li thought so, he drank the wine in one gulp. Then, he realized that something was wrong. When he turned his head, he saw the little maid standing behind him, smiling like a flower. Then, he looked to the side, in the direction of the grape wine, and saw Mississippi Lou looking at him with a sword in one hand, a cold smile on her face. Flirtatious, continue flirtatious. Chapter 398. Caught in the act of eloping, Li couldn't continue. Qing and Prefecture and Jingdo were two of the most prosperous cities in Jing Kingdom. Naturally, there was a lot of trade between them. There were often boats on the river. They were now on a medium-sized passenger ship. When he sneaked out in the morning, he didn't alert Mississippi Lou and Xiao Huan because they had left earlier than him and stayed in the compartment next to her and Rui. Only now did Li remember that Xiao Huan had looked at him strangely these days and often ran to Mississippi Lou's room. But because the servant girl had always been obedient, he didn't suspect anything. Now that he thought about it, they should have known about this plan a long time ago. Xiao Huan might really be angry. She was still hiding far away and ignoring him. This was the first time this had happened. There was no such thing as a honeymoon in this world. They wouldn't really think that he was going to elope with Rui and abandon them, would they? Li walked over and looked at her with a smile. "What's wrong, are you still angry?" Hearing the young master's voice, the servant girl's face lit up. But thinking of second Mrs. Warning, she immediately kept a straight face and turned her head away from him. Li turned again and pinched her face. "Are you really angry at young master?" The servant girl's face was very fleshy. Especially when they were in Willow Village, Li liked to pinch it. Later, for some reason, the days got better and better. Her cheeks were no longer as baby fat as before and slowly shrunk. Her oval face had the tendency to change into an oval face. She lost some of her cuteness but became more beautiful. The little girl was about to become a big girl. Li looked at her slightly pouting little mouth. His mind was filled with the scenes of the few of them getting along in the past 6 months. At this moment, there were only 4 people in the room. It was like after going around in circles, everything had returned to square one. The servant girl finally turned her head and looked at him with large, watery eyes. She said with a sob in her voice, "Young master, do you and Miss not want us anymore?" There was sadness in her voice, like a little animal that had been heartlessly abandoned. To her, that was the truth. The son-in-law and the young lady were everything to her. If they all left, leaving her and the second young lady alone in the capital, even if they could eat delicacies every day and have maids and servants to serve them, what was the point? Seeing that her eyes were filled with tears, Li Yi suddenly felt a little worried, and a strong sense of guilt welled up in his heart. He seemed to only consider him and Rui, but neglected Xiao Huan and Rui's feelings. Their way of thinking was completely different from his. Leaving without a word like this might really make them think more. No matter where young master and miss go in the future, they will take you with them. Li Yi held her shoulders and patted her gently. Really? The young maidservant's eyes were still misty. She wiped her eyes with her hands, revealing her dimples. You've stopped crying so quickly. Li Yi looked at her in surprise. You've learned to cry and act pitiful. Who taught you this? Having been exposed by Li Yi, the young maidservant blushed and ran away in a hurry. Ignoring her little thoughts, Li Yi sat back down at the table and continued his unfinished work. The distance from the capital to Qing and prefecture was not very far. Following the river, if the speed was fast, it would only take a day and a night to arrive. However, this passenger ship was not transporting any important goods, and there was no urgent matter, so there was no need to travel so quickly. It was leisurely and would take about 3 days to arrive. This time, Li Yi was not in a hurry. He had long wanted to see the famous mountains and rivers of this world. On the table was a simple map that he had asked Li Xian to get. The main drawing on it was the waterways between Qing and prefecture and the capital. The maps of this world were far from being as detailed and standard as those of the future. Usually, only the government and the imperial court would use them. The emphasis was on practicality. They were either next to mountains or next to rivers. There were no satellites, so they had to be manually measured. Li Yi marked a few asterisks on the map, representing a few important cities in the Jing kingdom. He used lines to connect them, and finally formed a map from the capital to Qing and prefecture. He planned to stop at these places for a day or two to look at the mountains, the rivers, and the scenery. He wanted to see the differences in the beauty of different places in the Jing kingdom and enjoy life. His dream in his previous life was to earn enough money to travel around the world. He wanted to see different sceneries, experience different customs, and experience the beauty of the world. Of course, the last dream could not be realized in his previous life, and the possibility of it being realized in this life was not very high. One should be down to earth, cherish life, and stay away from beauty. Did the young master really leave? Uncle Li, the housekeeper, held a letter in his hand. He was stunned, and his face was still full of disbelief. He felt that the young master's way of doing things in the past was capricious enough. He did not expect that he still had a very shallow understanding of the young master's capriciousness. How should he explain this to Madame Dowager? All the maids and servants in the Viscount's mansion, including the guards, did not know when the master and Madame left. Not to mention the maids and servants, the guards might feel a burning pain on their faces. Their duty was to protect the main house. Now that everyone had run away, who were they supposed to protect? Uncle Li held the letter. The letter only said that the young master and Madame would go back to Qing and prefecture and told them not to worry. As for when they would come back, he did not know. When he drove to the Li mansion to inform Madame Dowager, he still wanted to cry but had no tears. It was fine to leave, but at least tell them and bring a few guards. How could the master leave without saying goodbye? Madame and the others were all women. What if something happened to them? What? They left. Li Xian jumped down from the carriage and stood at the door of the Viscount's mansion. He looked at the servant and asked, "Where did they go? When will they come back?" The servant could only shake his head helplessly. He only knew that the Viscount, Madame, Second Miss, and Miss Xiao Huan had all disappeared this morning. They only left a letter for housekeeper Li. As for more things, it was not something that he could come into contact with. Li Xian broke into the mansion in disbelief. After a long time, he came out with a dumbfounded face. They left just like that. He originally wanted to find Li Yi to talk about some of his new ideas and have a meal. He did not expect to receive such news. This immediately made him feel disappointed. Go back. He looked back at the Viscount's mansion and got into the carriage with some depression. They really left just like that. Not long after, in the depths of the palace, Emperor Jing looked at the paper on the table and showed an expression of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 399. In the capital. There was a vast piece of flat land behind the Crown Prince's residence. 2 months ago, Li Xian had bought this piece of land. At this moment, a galloping steed galloped along a fixed route under the urging of the rider on its back. A rope was tied to the horse, which was connected to a black spot in the distant sky. A person with good eyesight would be able to see that the black dot was actually a huge kite. Under the peculiarly shaped kite was a black dog with wide, panic-stricken dog eyes. It was looking down at the mountains and rivers beneath it like a king, while cursing the 18 generations of ancestors of the guy who sent it to heaven in his heart. Even though it had flown countless times, it was still a dog. How could a dog be expected to get used to the sky? For it, flying around in the sky with its dog guts was far less interesting than doing happy things with its wife while Lao Wang was not around. Not many people cared what kind of mood the dog was in when it was flying. Several figures stood below and recorded some data on a piece of paper from time to time. There had been no problems in the experiment for half a month, which meant that they would not be able to eat dog meat hot pot for a long time. It was really a sad thing. At noon in April, the weather was sunny, but it was actually a bit hot. Craning his neck for a long time was tiring and also a bit hot. Li Xian took off his outer robe and threw it on the grass beside him. My husband, several concubines in the palace have sent people to ask what kind of perfume will be released next. The madams of those noble families have also invited me many times. The crown prince's wife walked over from a distance, followed by a faint fragrance. Smelling his favorite orchid fragrance, Li Xian was slightly refreshed and said, "Didn't I say that Uncle Huang can't smell that kind of fragrance? What do these concubines want?" A wry smile appeared on Crown Prince Consort's face. Princess Yongle, Li Xianzi, and their family had cooperated in the perfume business, which had caused an unimaginable sensation in the capital. All women, regardless of their status, were infatuated with it. Several perfume shops in the capital had already closed down a month ago. His Majesty's concubine was also a woman with the most distinguished status. How could she be inferior to ordinary people in this kind of business? Even her maiden family had hinted that they wanted to cooperate with her several times. She couldn't imagine how much profit this perfume business would bring if even the Wang family couldn't help but be tempted. However, there was no trace of Li Xianzi during this period of time. Princess Yongle never cared about the business. The perfume business had always been managed by Li Xianzi's residence. As the mistress of the Crown Prince's residence, she had received countless invitations during this period of time. Naturally, she had become unusually busy. If it was anyone else, it would be fine. However, they are all concubines after all. It's not good for them to not reply. She handed a small and exquisite wine pot to Li Xian, glanced at the black dot in the sky, and turned her head back. This matter is not urgent. Let's talk about it in a few days. Li Xian held the wine pot in his mouth and gulped down a few mouthfuls. He had learned this way of drinking from Li Yi. Of course, both of them couldn't hold their liquor well, so they could only drink the grape wine in this way. After a while, he put down the wine pot, wiped his mouth, and asked, "What date is it today?" The concubine thought about it and said, "April 8th, April 8th, it's been 2 months." Li Xian stared into the distance and mumbled in a low voice. "It's been 2 months. Where are they?" Inside the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing put down a document and walked out with his hands behind his back. Only after breathing in the fresh air did he feel much better. "Your Majesty, they have been in Yuezhou for 5 days. They should be arriving at the Qingham Prefecture soon." Chang De stood behind Emperor Jing and said in a low voice, "What a lazy young man. I am about to die from exhaustion in the capital." He, on the other hand, played around for 2 months. "If all the officials were like him, my Jing kingdom would have fallen a long time ago," Emperor Jing complained with a smile. Emperor Jing complained with a smile. There was a hint of envy in his tone as he said, "Sometimes, I also envy him. Although I am the ruler of a country, I am far less carefree than him. How about this old servant summon him back?" Chang De asked tentatively. Emperor Jing waved his hand and smiled, "Whatever. I am not going to compare myself to him. Since the beginning of time, there has never been an emperor who could live freely. However, now that he is gone, it has been a long time since someone could have a good meal with me." Chang De nodded slightly. He didn't know why, but ever since His Majesty hid his identity and ate a meal with that young man at the Ning Palace, His Majesty, who never had much of an appetite, could eat a lot of food in front of him. His Majesty was right. That young man was a weirdo through and through. "The ambassador from the Qi kingdom hasn't left yet?" Emperor Jing casually asked. Chang De said, "No. The third prince of the Qi kingdom is staying at the Honglu temple. He strolls around the capital every day and even visits brothels a few times. However, he hasn't done anything else. I heard that the third prince of the Qi kingdom is good at both literature and martial arts. He is very outstanding among the princes of the Qi kingdom. However, since he hasn't done anything, let him be," Emperor Jing said. When he was about to walk back into the hall with his hands behind his back, there was a sudden noise coming from the corridor on the side. Chang De frowned slightly. Recently, the concubines in the palace had been addicted to this perfume. However, County Magistrate Li had told His Majesty to stay as far away from that thing as possible. Chang De naturally wouldn't let those concubines get close to His Majesty. These days, he had stopped many of them. Imperial father, this time, it was obviously not a concubine. Princess Shanning pushed away 2 guards and trotted over to Emperor Jing. She said happily, "Imperial father, why are you here? It took Shanning a long time to find you." Emperor Jing touched her head lovingly and said, "What's wrong? Do you want to go out of the palace to play with your brother Xian again?" Shanning blushed and said, "Imperial father, I'm not as playful as you think. Besides, brother Xian isn't playing. He is making something that is very useful to the Jing kingdom." Emperor Jing smiled and said, "Well, Imperial father is busy. Tell me, what are you looking for me for?" "Oh, I almost forgot." Princess Shanning heard this and immediately waved to the back. She said, "Bring it here quickly." Then, she turned to look at Emperor Jing with a smile and said, "Imperial father, I just made soup. If you're tired of reading the memorials, you can have a taste." Soup. When Emperor Jing heard this, he seemed to think of something terrible. His expression immediately changed and he hurriedly said, "Shanning, Imperial father still has a few important memorials to read. You can go play first. Leave the soup there. Imperial father will drink it later." Looking at Emperor Jing striding into the hall, Princess Shanning looked a little disappointed. Then, she seemed to think of something. She turned to look at Changde and said, "The soup won't taste good when it's cold." "Chief Steward Chang, you must be tired of serving Imperial Father. Why don't you try it?" Even as a first-class master in the world, he could face a martial arts master head-on. But in the face of Princess Shanning's soup, the face of the #1 master in the palace immediately changed. "Wait, I'll go and get it for you." Princess Shanning ran to the palace maid who was holding the tray. When she turned back to talk to Changde, she found that the opposite side was empty. The door of the Hall of Diligent Government was closed and a cloud of dust was spreading in front of her eyes. "Who is it?" After a while, Princess Shanning realized what had happened. She pouted and said discontentedly, "I practiced several times according to teacher's instructions." Chapter 400. As a viscount who was both important and insignificant, Li Yi's departure didn't have much impact on the capital. The biggest change he had made in the capital was to make all the females in the capital crazy. The appearance of perfume and the expansion of production made him the man behind the back of countless young girls and young women in the capital. It also made countless men gnash their teeth in hatred. Because of the high price of perfume, the speed at which new perfume was introduced was astonishing. Even if it was the same perfume, it could be put in different porcelain bottles of different sizes, and even the name could be different. As for those crazy fans, they wouldn't stop until they collected all the series of gifts given to women by the heavens. It was fine for those who were well off, but those who were a bit shy would naturally hate perfume to the extreme. Of course, this kind of hatred was often reduced a lot when they smelled the nice fragrance of their wives, especially at a special, harmonious moment. The effect of perfume was too obvious. The emperor's concubines were also women, and women couldn't resist the temptation of perfume. The direct result was that the emperor only stayed in the palace of the empress and concubine Yen for 2 whole months, because in the entire harem, only the empress and concubine Yen didn't use perfume. As for the other concubines, His Majesty wouldn't look for them anyway, so the result would be the same whether they used perfume or not. Of course, the most important thing was to be happy. Because of Li Yi's departure, the princes and princesses in the palace could finally get rid of those obscure numbers and symbols and completely let themselves go. Among them, Prince Jean was the most successful. At most, the other princes were more lively than before. Prince Jean, who was tortured by the mathematics teacher, waited for 2 months, but the hateful mathematics teacher didn't come back. Finally, like a wild dog or a pig that got out of the fence, he not only tore the mathematics textbook to pieces and burned it, but also pinched Yongning's face as revenge. Although Yongning would never fight back made him feel very unfulfilled, when he thought about how he was targeted because he bullied Yongning, how he was hung on the stage because he couldn't write an answer, and how he lost face in front of his brothers and sisters. Prince Jean felt that everything was meaningful. The naive young man obviously didn't have a long-term plan, and he didn't know that the nightmare he thought had not ended, but had not yet begun. Until many years later, when the dean of the Institute of Mathematics of the Jingguo Academy of Sciences, who once fought against all the PhD students in the Imperial College of Mathematics without losing, loudly said, "I'm not saying that you are garbage, I mean, everyone here is garbage." This classic sentence, when Prince Jean recalled his childhood, he still couldn't forget the fear of being dominated by mathematics. Viscount Mansion. And Rui have been gone for 2 months. Why aren't they back yet? The old lady of the Li family was sitting in the yard with a needle and thread in her hand. She was making a small dress. The blind old lady of the He family also looked a little envious and said, "If only I had been blinded a little later, I would have been able to see what they look like. I would have been able to make clothes for their children like my old sister." The old lady of the Li family smiled and said, "I'm also idle. While I can still see, I'll make a few more. I missed the child 20 years ago, and I can't miss it this time." The old lady of the He family nodded and said, "I have nothing to think about in my life. I just want to see Yunyang's child have a child as soon as possible. At that time, even if I die, I can close my eyes while. The two old ladies chatted while basking in the sun. Naturally, the topic was Li Yi and Rui, or their children. A little farther away from the two old ladies, in a place with better sunlight, a kind-looking old man was lying on a rocking chair. His face showed a comfortable expression, and he snorted slightly from time to time. In the accounting room, Uncle Li was calculating the accounts one by one. Now, he was able to maintain his composure in the face of the huge numbers. He thought to himself that at this rate, it wouldn't be long before the family would have to build another house to store the money. Outside the mansion, Fong was supervising the craftsmen to build houses. More than a dozen houses that were about to be completed were scattered on both sides of the Viscount mansion. He looked around and found that no craftsmen were slacking off. He casually sat on the stone steps at the door with a depressed expression on his face. More than a month ago, after he came to the capital from Qing and mansion with everyone, he learned that the son-in-law and the young lady had returned to Qing and mansion. For more than a month, he had been doing these boring things every day, and his heart was really depressed. Zhu Zi secretly ate sweets and broke his teeth. All day long, his cheeks were swollen, and he cried for his parents. His wife at home now forbade him to eat candied haws again. Several women discussed and soon moved the candied haws business to the streets of the capital. Now, every day was busy, and only he was relatively idle. He began to miss the old days. Even if he ran up and down the mountain every day, selling nectar, and playing with the terrifying things with the son-in-law to kill the outlaws, it was still much more interesting than his current life. Of course, after coming to the capital, he would never be able to see Miss Xiao Hong again. Old Fong let out a long sigh and stared blankly at the azure sky. The pure white clouds gradually transformed into the appearance of a round-faced woman. Guizhou was one of the provinces of the Jing kingdom. It was famous for its dangerous mountains and rivers, and it was next to Qing and mansion. At this time, on the official road from Guizhou to Qing and mansion, a carriage was slowly moving forward. The driver was a young woman. She was dressed in a tight outfit and leaned against the carriage. In her hands, she was holding a strange picture book that she bought when she passed by a place. However, she did not flip through it for a long time. Her pretty face revealed a hint of laziness as she listened to the sounds coming from inside the carriage. The inside of the carriage was very spacious. It should be quite spacious for 4 or 5 people to sit inside. At this time, a young woman with 2 buns of hair was resting her cheeks in her hands as she listened to the mysterious stories of sword immortals flying on swords. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly rang out. In the middle of the road, a thick tree trunk blocked the road, sending up a cloud of dust. The woman's eyebrows slightly moved. She put down the picture book in her hands and looked forward. Not long after, a rustling sound came from the side of the dense forest. Immediately, a strong man wearing coarse hemp clothes jumped out from the side and blocked the front of the carriage. He fiercely said, "This mountain was planted by me. Bah! This mountain was planted by me. This tree, this tree." The expression on the burly man's face was a little awkward. This was the first time he had done something like this. He was illiterate, and he had to ask several people before he managed to ask about the official language of robbery. However, at this most important moment, he was so nervous that he completely forgot about it. This mountain was planted by me. This tree was planted by me. If you want to pass through, you have to pay for the road. The woman in the tight outfit jumped down from the carriage and glared at the man. She crossed her arms and reminded him. The man's face revealed a look of realization. He slapped his forehead and said loudly, "Yes, this mountain was planted by me. This tree is mine. It's me. What's mine again?" Chapter 401. I don't care. The man was obviously not very good at memorizing. After just 4 sentences, he scratched his head hard but still couldn't remember. He shook his head angrily and looked at the woman, saying, "As long as you hand over 10 taels of silver, I won't make things difficult for you." "First time as a bandit?" The young woman glanced at the man and asked indifferently. "Yes." The man scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "Why are you doing this?" "To buy medicine for my brother's illness." "Just you?" "Just me," the burly man answered a few words and suddenly realized that something was wrong. It took him a while to realize that he was here to rob, not to be interrogated. He said angrily, "Stop talking nonsense and take out the silver, otherwise. He sat down on the tree in the middle of the road and said, "Or else you won't be able to get through here today." Whoosh! The burly man suddenly felt a cold light appear in front of him. In the next moment, the tree trunk beneath him broke into 2 halves, causing his body to stagger and directly sit on the ground. When he reacted, a long sword was already on his neck. The woman looked down at him and said, "How can you be a bandit if you can't even speak properly?" The man looked wronged. It was also his first time in this business. It was already very good for him to be able to recite a few sentences from his first job. "You can speak properly when you have memorized it," the woman said coldly. "I opened this mountain, this tree is mine, this tree is planted by me. If you want to pass, stay. This mountain is opened by me, this tree is planted by me. Want, why don't you leave? I don't want the silver." The man looked wronged and tears were about to flow down his face. Xiao Huan opened the curtain and looked at the man who was squatting on the ground with his hands on his head. She covered her mouth and laughed, "Young master, this bandit is so stupid." Li Yi couldn't agree more. The bandit in front of him looked like a half-baked gangster. Not only had he not received any formal education, but he had also not read A Bandit's Self-Cultivation, Basic Etiquette for Highway Robbery, and How to Speak Fluent Mandarin. It seemed that there was something wrong with his head. However, Mississippi Lou was bullying him by making him hold his head and squat there to memorize. However, when she thought about it, it was normal. She could be vague about other things, but she absolutely had zero tolerance for fake mountain thieves who tried to bluff their way through. When the man was finally able to recite the most basic sentence, he finally looked like a bandit. Mississippi Lou then asked him to move the tree trunks on the road, and the carriage started moving again. Through the window at the back, Li Yi saw that the man was still following closely behind. "I've already given you the money, why aren't you leaving?" Li Yi opened the window a crack and said. As the man chased after the carriage, he said in a loud voice, "You're going to Qing Prefecture, right? I'll escort you there. I won't take the money. When I have money, I'll definitely return the money you gave me." Li Yi was amused by this guy. What kind of bandit would want to return the money after taking it? This is the money you stole with your own ability. Why do you want to return it? The man was clearly confused by Li Yi's words. After thinking for a long time, he rubbed the back of his head and said, "It's not with my ability. I can't beat you. You're good people. I'll escort you to Qing Prefecture. You already said you can't beat us. Why do we need you to escort us?" Li Yi realized that this man was a bit of a one-track mind. It felt weird to have someone like this following beside the carriage. "Even if I don't escort you, I still want to go to Qing Prefecture." The man gave a simple and honest smile and said, "Because my family is from Qing Prefecture. In today's society, even such a simple and honest man knew how to play tricks. The world's morals were deteriorating day by day, and people's hearts were not what they used to be." Li Yi lowered the window. He gave up when he was tired and continued to tell Xiao Huan about the legend of the Sword Immortals. Occasionally, he would look out the window. When the official road became smoother and the carriage was less bumpy, it meant that they had entered the territory of Qing Prefecture. He had not expected that it would take them 2 whole months to go from the capital to Qing and prefecture. On this journey, they had passed through countless prefectures and prefectures. They had thoroughly experienced what it was like to travel as a family. Other than the carriage, there was no other convenient means of transportation. Because they were going sightseeing, they naturally eliminated the possibility of taking a boat. They did not completely follow the waterway. They walked and stopped along the way, almost seeing all the scenery along the way. Of course, in these 2 months, he had brought 3 first-class beauties through the streets. In these 2 months, they had encountered a lot of trouble. Without going through it personally, it was impossible to know how chaotic the other deserted places, other than Qing and prefecture and the capital, were. In 2 months, they had encountered bandits and horse thieves no less than 10 times. Of course, there were not many of these bandits. At most, there were only a few dozen of them. Ru Yi didn't even need to do anything. Ru could kill them all by herself with her sword. Even Xiao Huan, who was a little afraid at the beginning, could face the bandits with a smile after a few robberies and discuss with Li Yi what to eat for supper. This was also the reason why Li Yi did not bring a single guard when he traveled. With a wife and sister-in-law like this, where couldn't he go in this big world? Apart from this, the most serious incident was when they passed by a certain province. The son of the provincial governor's family molested a girl on the street and spoke rudely to second young Miss Liu. She crippled him with a single strike of her sword, and the 4 of them were surrounded by nearly 100 soldiers. That time, Li Yi didn't bother second young Miss Liu to do anything. For official matters, he only needed a token to settle it. In the end, the provincial governor even apologized and gave him a generous gift. This made Li Yi feel that the old emperor was actually quite generous. With a token in hand, the experience of having the world at his disposal wasn't bad. As the saying goes, the mountain in sight runs the horse to death. This saying was completely true. The short distance on the map could not be reached no matter how hard they tried. In the end, they could only pick up the pace and finally officially set foot on the land of Qing and prefecture today. When he returned, he would suggest to the old emperor that the person who drew this map should be hung up and beaten. The scale was seriously out of balance. If they relied on this kind of map to fight, they wouldn't need to worry about how brave the enemy would be. They would kill themselves. Benefactor, you must have traveled a long way, right? The burly man sat cross-legged outside the carriage and asked Li Yi with a silly smile. Seeing this fellow chase after the carriage for 2 hours and still not gasping for breath, Li Yi was very impressed by this fellow's physique. He nodded and said, "From the capital." "The capital? That's very, very far. I heard that the emperor lives in the capital. The houses in the palace are all built with gold." The burly man said with a face full of surprise. "I've never been to the capital. My big brother told me all this." Li Yi took Mississippi Liu's place and came out for some fresh air. Hearing the burly man's words, he thought to himself that the old emperor was not so extravagant. Along the way, he saw many people rushing in the same direction on the official road. Puzzled, he asked, "What's going on up ahead?" The burly man chuckled and said, "Benefactor, you probably don't know about this, but these people are all heading towards the Qin family ditch. There's a newly built brothel there. No, I think it's called a theater or something, but it's all the same. There's a big show inside. You can go in for 2 copper coins, but you can only stand and watch for 2 copper coins. I've only gone in once. Oh my God, that female ghost is so scary." At the mention of the theater, the burly man seemed to have turned on a chatterbox. He talked non-stop to Li Yi and said, "Speaking of this theater, it's amazing. It's opened all over Qing and prefecture. The shows inside are amazing. Female ghosts, white snakes. I've never seen them before. There's even an arena in the theater for those martial arts masters to fight in. There's some ranking list of martial arts masters. Watching them fight is even better than watching a big show. The only problem is that there are too many people around, so I can't squeeze in. The burly man talked non-stop as if he didn't know fatigue. However, when he was talking about these things, he always had a faint smile on his face. Before he left, he completely handed over the matters of the theater to Old Man Sun and Wan Ruoqing. At that time, he told them not to rush to expand and to wait until everything was stable before slowly developing. Unexpectedly, in just 2 months, the theater in their hands had grown to such a scale. Chapter 402. The bare-shouldered girl let out a long yawn and climbed out of bed. Through the window, she saw that the sun had already risen to the middle of the sky. It was all because she had slept too late last night. Otherwise, she wouldn't have gotten up at this time. She rolled around on the bed and saw the familiar figure still sitting in front of the table, frowning and writing something on a piece of paper from time to time. The girl jumped out of bed and exclaimed in surprise, "Sister Ruoqing, you didn't sleep last night again." The woman turned around and saw the girl sitting on the bed in an indecent posture. She pointed at the girl's undergarment that had slipped halfway down and turned back to write on a piece of paper. "There are some things that need to be taken care of, and the personnel arrangements for the newly built theaters haven't been decided yet. I've thought about it for one night, and it'll be over soon." The girl on the bed didn't wear any shoes or socks. She walked over barefoot, wearing only an undergarment and undergarments. She lay on Xiao Zhu's back and hooked her arms around her neck. "But you can't stay up all night. When Li left, he told me to take good care of you." "No, I won't listen to you next time. I'll go to sleep first. I'll tie you up on the bed before midnight." Wan Ruoqing put down her pen and moved Xiao Zhu's hands away. The 2 lumps of pressure on her back became even more obvious. She shook her head and said, "You're a big girl now. How can a big girl run on the ground with an undergarment on? Hurry up and put on some clothes. It won't be good if other people see. There are no outsiders here, what are you afraid of?" The girl reluctantly climbed down from Wan Ruoqing's back, walked to the head of the bed and began to slowly put on her clothes. At this time, another figure walked in from outside the door. The girl looked up and turned a deaf ear to it. She adjusted her dudu as if she didn't see it. Xing Zumo glanced at the girl and no longer looked at her. She put a bowl of hot porridge in front of Wan Ruoqing and said, "Who can see you work so hard? Your body is about to collapse. Is it worth it?" Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "It's not as serious as you make it out to be. It's just that there are a lot of things happening these days. I'll be fine once I get through it. What are you cooking? Finish this bowl of porridge and go to sleep." Xing Zumo put away the papers on the table and said after a pause, "I was in the theater just now and overheard some constables chatting. Constable Lu sent a letter from the capital. Arrestor Lu was, of course, Lu Yi. Under Li Yi's special instructions, he had helped the theater a lot, including Xing Zumo's rise in fame, which attracted the covetous attention of several rich young masters. He was also the one who helped them deal with it. Although the 2 girls didn't have much communication with him, he was the person they were most familiar with in the county government. About 2 months ago, County Magistrate Lu of Anxi County was transferred to the capital. It was said that he was promoted. It was a sensational event in Qing and Prefecture. Even they had heard about it. Arrestor Lu left with the county magistrate. Fortunately, the bailiffs in the county government had been taking good care of the theater. Not only did they deal with several groups of ruffians who caused trouble, but they also made the theater the focus of their patrols. However, Wan Ruoqing still did not understand what Arrestor Lu's letter from the capital city had to do with them. Arrestor Lu mentioned that person in the letter. "Do you want to hear it?" When speaking of that person, there was a touch of anger in Xing Zumo's tone. As the biggest winner of the theater, he walked away and left all these chores to a weak woman. As the scale of the theater continued to expand, Xing Zumo could see how hard it had been for Wan Ruoqing in the past few months. She had become a lot more haggard, so she was naturally full of resentment towards Li Yi. Of course, it could not be ruled out that there were other reasons for the resentment. Perhaps the resentment began to accumulate since he left without saying goodbye a few months ago, and it had only reached its peak now. Wan Ruoqing had been busy since last night, and she was actually a little hungry. She sipped the porridge. Hearing Xing Zumo's words, the expression on her face changed, but she didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. He has been conferred the title of nobility. Now he is living a good life in the capital. I'm afraid he won't come back. What's the use of doing these things? Even Xing Zumo herself didn't realize that when she said this, her tone had become different from usual. Xiao Zhu put on her clothes, looked at the two people in the room, stuck out her tongue, and quietly left. Wan Ruoqing put down the spoon and said after a while, people have to do something. It's not this, it's that. Doing these things can make more people have food to eat. I also like it very much. Xing Zumo asked angrily, do you believe these words yourself? What about you? Wan Ruoqing raised her head and looked at her seriously. In the room, the atmosphere began to fall into a long silence. It's none of my business. After a long time, Xing Zumo said angrily, turned around, and walked out. Wan Ruoqing smiled helplessly, walked to the bed, and lay down. The moment she touched the pillow, sleepiness swept over her. The next scene is about to begin. Let them control the time. How is the script rehearsal of A Chinese Ghost Story going? Fu, go and keep an eye on them. Don't let them slack off. The list of martial arts masters can't be delayed. Several arenas need timely feedback, got it. I'll ask Miss One about this later. In a theater that had just been built, Old Man Sun took a sip of tea. Only then did he feel that his smoky throat was much better. In the whole Qing and prefecture, there were now more than 20 theaters scattered in various places. The daily affairs were so complicated that he had no time to tell stories. Especially these theaters that had just been built and were still in the initial stage, they couldn't leave him. At this moment, he finally understood what County Magistrate Li said to him when he left Qing and prefecture. He thought he was conservative enough. He didn't expect that he didn't underestimate the market, but overestimated his own energy. Sure enough, as there were more and more theaters, many problems appeared. If it weren't for Miss Ruoqing helping him with most of the affairs, he was afraid that his old bones would end here. However, these chores were only a part of Old Sun's worries. Although the theater was constantly developing, the popularity of the Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio series and Legend of the White Snake was gradually declining. Although under the guidance of County Magistrate Li, things that were extended around the list of martial arts masters could already keep the theater open for a long time, once they lost a good script, some ideas in his mind could only go so far. In addition, there were more difficult problems that were gradually pressing on. After County Magistrate Lu left Qing and Prefecture, Arrestor Lu Yi also left. They had lost their biggest support, the newly appointed County Magistrate. A few days ago, he had finally seen the profits of the brothel. After he had hinted a few times, but Lu Yi pretended not to know, he had finally begun to suppress them to varying degrees. This matter had to be resolved as soon as possible. With decades of experience, he knew better than anyone how many ways the government could stop a brothel from operating normally. Li Yi didn't know Old Sun's worries. At this time, he had just arrived at the city gate. Sitting outside the carriage, he looked at the familiar tall city wall and felt a sense of familiarity. Qing and Prefecture, finally back. Chapter 403. Naturally, Li Yi's feelings for Qing and Prefecture could not be compared to those in the capital. Even though the capital was more prosperous than here, there was no Willow Village, no Rue Square, no brothel, no theater, and even the name of a brothel was not as pleasing to the ear as the Jade Courtyard. After 2 months of traveling, he had had enough fun, but it was also very tiring. Right now, Li Yi only wanted to quickly return home, lie on that familiar bed, and have a good sleep. The carriage went straight through the city gate. Li Yi didn't know how many times he had walked this street. After 2 or 3 months, even the roadside vendors hadn't changed much. Li Yi even saw Danyo in a constable's uniform wandering on the road. The door of the Rui Square was tightly shut. The fat shopkeeper of the cloth shop next door moved a chair and sat in front of the shop. He continued to sigh about the poor business in the shop. Everything was the same as when he left. The honest man left halfway, so Li Yi had to drive himself. The carriage finally stopped in front of a large house. There were no adults at the door, but a few children were playing. Elder Fong had left the capital city a step earlier than them to pick up the people here. Now that 2 months had passed, they had probably arrived in the capital city a long time ago. However, this place did not seem to be uninhabited, and they did not know why. Seeing Li Yi and the others get out of the carriage, the children immediately stopped playing and hid behind the door. When they saw them coming inside, they immediately scattered and ran deeper into the courtyard. Just as the 4 of them stepped into the house, a figure came out to greet them. The girl named Yang Liuqing was slightly startled, and then said with surprise, "Master, uncle, you're back." The room and courtyard were cleaned every day, even cleaner and tidier than when Li Yi left. According to Yang Liuqing, after Fong and the others left, the task of looking after the house was handed over to her and the children. These orphans no longer had to rely on begging for a living. The more honest ones were doing some simple work in the theater. The rest of them were not idle either. The older children led their younger brothers and sisters out to sell candied haws every day. The money they earned was enough to feed all of them, and there was still a surplus. "Uncle, after you left, elder son of the theater and the steward of the mansion would send some silver every half a month. It's all here." Yang Liuqing had the boys carry out a few boxes from the room and explained. Li Yi was not surprised that Ning Wang Fu would send money every once in a while. As for the other money, Li Yi remembered that when he left, he had them use it to run the theater. The only person who had the power to decide the ownership of this money was Ruoqing. However, when he came, he heard the man say that Elder's son and the others had opened theaters all over Qing and Prefecture. It seemed that the profits brought in by the theater were more than he had imagined. Under the premise of ensuring continued expansion, there was still so much surplus. He didn't need so much silver at the moment. If there were no accidents, the perfume business with Li Xian and Her Highness in the capital should be doing well. In the future, the silver would only flow into his home. No matter how much he had, it wouldn't be of much use. Originally, he thought that he would have to tidy up after coming back. He didn't expect to have such a diligent martial nephew. Li Yi could lie down and sleep when he returned to the room. In these 2 months, under the guidance of the deceptive map, it wasn't every day that he could coincidentally find an inn. Sometimes, he could only sleep in the wild. Later, Li Yi simply made a few simple tents, but how could a tent be more comfortable than a bed? Even the blanket was just dried. He was too lazy to take off his clothes and shoes and directly lay down. After 2 months of bumpy and wandering, it was rare for him to have such a comfortable moment. After a while, he fell into a deep sleep. When he opened his eyes again, the exhaustion accumulated over the past few days was swept away. He walked out of the room and found that the sky was already a little dark. Yang Liuqing was practicing swordsmanship alone in the courtyard. Although Mississippi Lu still hadn't officially acknowledged her as her disciple, she would occasionally give her a few pointers. Although the 2 of them weren't master and disciple in name, they were actually master and disciple in reality. Therefore, Li Yi had picked up a martial nephew for free. Although his martial uncle's ability was probably maybe okay, Li Yi admitted that he couldn't beat Yang Liuqing, but who asked him to have a powerful sister-in-law? As for Yang Liuqing, Li Yi still had some appreciation in his heart. It could even be said that he admired her. Among the people he knew, in terms of persistence and diligence, if she was the second, no one could be called the first. In the days when Mississippi Lu didn't agree to accept her as a disciple, she came here early in the morning to clean and left in the evening. She persisted for a long time. Whenever she was free, she could be seen practicing swordsmanship outside. Not only did her frequency far exceed Li Yi's, but even Mississippi Lu was not as good as her. Perhaps this was also one of the reasons why Mississippi Lu changed her original intention. Seeing Li Yi coming out of the room, Yang Liuqing hurriedly stopped and said, "Master and martial uncle have returned to Willow Village. They asked me to wait for you to wake up and tell you." Li Yi nodded, indicating that he understood. Willow Village was the place where Rui and the others grew up. Of course, they had to visit this time when they came back. Even Xiao Huan had mentioned it many times along the way. They might not have many opportunities to come back in the future. On the way here, they had agreed to go back to the village and stay for a few days. Willow Village carried too much weight for them. This was the childhood memory of the three sisters. Li Yi didn't want to join in the fun. He slept for a long time and was a little hungry. He planned to go out and find something to eat. He used to walk the road from the house to Rui workshop, and now it was no exception. Rui workshop wasn't open, and Li Yi didn't intend to cook by himself. He entered from the entrance of the wall market and walked to the door of a courtyard. He found that the door was actually not closed. Li Yi gently pushed the door and went in. There was a faint light coming from inside the room. He was going to go in, but suddenly it seemed that he smelled something. He sniffed, and the next moment, his face immediately showed an expression of surprise. He didn't choose to go straight, but turned into a small room on the side. After entering, he found that it was the kitchen. At this time, it was getting darker. Although it wasn't completely dark, it was still difficult to see clearly. Fortunately, what Li Yi was looking for was not difficult to find. He followed the smell and opened a food box on the table. The long-lost familiar smell immediately became strong. Osmanthus cake. It was like the osmanthus cake made by Ruoqing. Li Yi would never forget this taste. He was already a little hungry, so he couldn't wait to pinch a piece, then a second, a third, a fourth. At this time, all of Li Yi's attention was on the food in front of him. He didn't realize that a delicate figure had quietly come behind him. Looking at the dark shadow in the kitchen, the girl showed a frightened expression on her face. She held the wooden stick in her hand tightly and quietly approached the dark shadow. "There's a thief." This was the first feeling in her heart. He came in without saying a word and hid in the kitchen sneakily. Who else could it be but a thief? As long as she shouted a few times, someone next door would hear it and rush over to catch the little thief and send him to the government. However, before that, she had to teach this bold guy a good lesson. Finally, she walked to the dark shadow with his back facing her. The girl gritted her teeth, raised the wooden stick in her hand, and swung it at the little thief. Chapter 404. Although the girl's strength was not great, when she used all her strength, the wooden stick cut through the air and made a sound of wind. Li Yi picked up the osmanthus cake with one hand, and suddenly reached behind him with the other hand, grabbing the wooden stick with great precision in the dark. Mississippi Lu's previous devilish training was very effective, making his skills a lot better than in his previous life. He couldn't beat a martial arts master, but he could deal with a weak girl. The girl didn't seem to expect the little thief's reaction to be so fast. Her attack missed, and she subconsciously opened her mouth to scream. However, when she opened her mouth, a piece of osmanthus cake was stuffed into her mouth before the sound came out. What are you screaming for in the middle of the night? Li Yi said impatiently, and took a step toward the light outside. The sky was not completely dark yet, and standing outside, he could vaguely see the appearance. He thought that after Xiao Zhu saw him, even if she didn't jump excitedly, she wouldn't use the stick to greet him. But after a moment of shock, she shouted in a more shrill voice, "Ghost!" In the dark, the expression on Li Yi's face froze, and a few black lines appeared on his forehead. "Brother Dong, Uncle Wang, it's really nothing. It's just that I accidentally sprained my ankle when I was walking just now. I'm sorry for causing you trouble." Xiao Zhu explained to the two people standing outside the door apologetically. "It's no trouble." The kind middle-aged man looked into the room and asked, "Where's Miss Ruoqing? Is there really nothing at home?" Xiao Zhu said, "Sister Ruoqing is in the room, there's really nothing wrong." Xiao Zhu explained for a long time, and then the middle-aged man dispelled the doubts in his heart and said, "If there's anything, just shout, and we'll come immediately." After sending the two people away with great difficulty, Xiao Zhu closed the door and quickly ran into the room. At the same time, Li Yi also finished the last piece of osmanthus cake. "Is it really you?" She walked around Li Yi twice and asked suspiciously. Today, she had heard from Zuemo that he was living a good life in the capital, that he had been conferred a noble title, that he was a high-ranking official, and so on. Yet, she saw him stealing things from the kitchen at night. Xiao Zhu couldn't believe it no matter how hard she tried, which was why she had screamed earlier. "Apart from me, does anyone else know that you were bitten by a dog when you were a child?" When Li Yi was sunbathing in the courtyard behind the Rui workshop, he often chatted with Xiao Zhu, who climbed up the wall, so it was very easy to prove his identity. Hearing this, the suspicion on Xiao Zhu's face disappeared, but it quickly turned into anger. "You still know to come back." Hearing this, Li Yi was startled and couldn't react for a moment. What did he mean by, "he knew to come back"? Looking at her expression again, there was disappointment mixed with anger, like a little wife who had caught her husband fooling around outside at night, and all the emotions of grievance were written all over her face. Li Yi's heart was full of doubts, but her emotions didn't seem fake. For a moment, he even suspected, before he left Qing and Prefecture, that he had lost another particularly important memory. What happened to me? Thinking of this, even his words became strangely guilty. Xiao Zhu sat down angrily across from him, and asked, "Do you know, how did Sister Ruoqing get through these days?" How did she get through? Li Yi thought, why did it bring up Ruoqing again? Could it be, in the memory that he had lost, the main character was someone else? Even if it was amnesia, it should be a memory from half a year ago. The plot couldn't be so complicated and bizarre, right? Chen Yuzhu looked at Li Yi, and said angrily, "These 2 months, Sister Ruoqing hasn't slept well at all. Do you know, because of those things in the brothel, she didn't sleep at all last night, and today she slept for less than an hour. She has lost a lot of weight. Didn't I remind you several times before I left to take good care of Miss Ruoqing, to let her pay attention to rest, and not overwork?" Li Yi looked at her and said, "Don't tell me you didn't get this allowance." He knew Wan Ruoqing worked very hard, and when he left, he specifically told Xiao Zhu that when necessary, the matter of the brothel could be put aside, and taking good care of her body was the most important. He had reminded her of this more than once, and even specially paid her a salary. Now she was blaming him. Xiao Zhu was speechless for a moment, because what Li Yi said was the truth, but how could she change what Sister Ruoqing had decided? In short, it was still his fault. "I don't care, the brothel is yours, you think of a way." The young girl pouted, and didn't intend to reason with Li Yi, with a look of, "I am cute, I am right." Li Yi did not intend to reason with Xiao Zhu. Only now did he understand why the brothel business had developed so quickly in just a short 2 to 3 months. Wan Ruoqing had even forgotten to eat and sleep because of this, and he as the shopkeeper, felt a little guilty. "Where is Miss Ruoqing now?" Li Yi stood up and asked. "Inside." Xiao Zhu pointed to the room with the light on, and said doubtfully, "Strange, we were talking so loudly outside, Sister Ruoqing should have heard us long ago, why hasn't she come out yet?" Li Yi and Xiao Zhu opened the curtain and walked in, and saw a figure leaning over the table. Even in her sleep, Ruoqing was frowning slightly, as if she had encountered something troublesome. She looked far more haggard than the last time Li Yi saw her, and although her beauty hadn't decreased, there was a hint of poignant beauty in her. These days, it was as Xiao Zhu said, she really did forget to eat and sleep, otherwise she wouldn't be so thin. "Sho! Sister Ruoqing is asleep, don't disturb her." The young girl made a shushing gesture to him. Li Yi nodded, and walked over slowly. There were some papers neatly stacked on the table, and the handwriting on them was very elegant, familiar hairpin-style small regular script. Li Yi picked up a few of them and looked at them, they were about the specific arrangements of each brothel. There were many of these papers, she couldn't have been handling all the trifling matters by herself all the time, could she? Her hands were half in the air, and her head was leaning on the table, exhaustion written all over her face. Seeing her eyelashes tremble a few times, as if she was about to open her eyes, Li Yi reached out and touched a spot on the back of her neck. "What are you doing?" Xiao Zhu ran to the front, looking at him warily. "She needs a good rest now, I just touched her sleep point." Li Yi walked to the chair, looked at her, and said impatiently, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and help her." In fact, the young girl didn't have much strength, so she couldn't help much. Li Yi almost carried her to the bed by himself, and covered her with the quilt. That light touch just now, she wouldn't wake up until the next morning. When Wan Ruoqing fainted in front of Rui brothel, he had also carried her, and this time, he found that she was much lighter than before. "She won't wake up until tomorrow morning, I'll take these things on the table, take good care of her." Li Yi picked up the stack of things, looked at Ruoqing again, and walked out of the room. Watching Li Yi's figure disappear outside the door, the young girl curled her lips, and said in a low voice, "You know how to care for Sister Ruoqing, at least you have some conscience." Chapter 405. The osmanthus cake could barely fill one's stomach, but it was not enough. Not far from Rui Lane, there was a noodle stall. Li Yi and Xiao Huan used to frequent it. He didn't expect the noodle woman to still be there. Li Yi ate another bowl of noodles. The woman didn't speak much and didn't seem to recognize that he used to be a regular customer of the noodle stall. She had many customers every day and it was difficult to remember one or two. After finishing the noodles and returning home, he lit the lamp and sat at the table. He took out the things he got from Ruoqing and carefully flipped through them. The handwriting on the paper was elegant and the content clear. Li Yi didn't have to spend much effort to have a comprehensive understanding of the current situation of the theater. There were about 20 theaters in Qing and Prefecture, with the prefecture as the center and extending outwards. Because of the lack of manpower, it had almost reached the limit of expansion. As for the Jianghu and Wulin, they were all handled by Old Man Sunday. The authority of the Wulin hero ranking increased day by day. There were even some brothels outside the city that provided arenas for all kinds of masters to compete for rankings. The masters participating there were free of charge, but the spectators had to pay a certain fee. Of course, no one was short of a few copper coins. Many people felt that watching two people fight on the stage was much more interesting than watching a group of people perform. Therefore, there was no lack of spectators for every competition, and the profits could not be ignored. It wasn't easy to develop to this point in 2 months. No one knew better than Li Yi how powerful this force was. Of course, the current development of the brothel had reached a bottleneck. If they wanted to keep the customers, they had to continuously innovate and have better stories and scripts. Fortunately, he still had to stay in Qing and Prefecture for a while longer. Taking advantage of this time, he could bring out the legendary cultural crystals. He had slept enough during the day and didn't feel tired. He took out a brush and paper. Xiao Huan wasn't there, so he could only grind the ink himself. After a while, Li Yi raised the brush and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, a thick book that others couldn't see floated in front of him. On the front page were 3 big words: Journey to the West. Before the chaos was divided, the world was in chaos, and no one could see it. Ever since Pangu broke the primordial world and created the distinction between pure and turbid. As a few lines of small words appeared on the paper, the story of a monkey officially opened a new chapter in this strange world. In the courtyard next door, the girl's body moved about, using the moonlight to practice her swordsmanship. She would look up from time to time. Even when she was about to rest, the lights were still on. The moment Wan Ruoqing opened her eyes, she was stung by the sunlight shining through the window. She covered her eyes with her hand and sat up on the bed with a trace of doubt on her face. If she remembered correctly, she only wanted to take a nap on the table for a quarter of an hour. How did she end up lying on the bed? Moreover, the sky was clearly turning dark at that time. Why did it suddenly light up now? Was it an illusion? For her, from the time she laid on the table to the time she woke up on the bed, it seemed that only a quarter of an hour had passed. At this moment, her mind was still a little dazed. "You're awake." Just as she was trying to make her mind clear as soon as possible, a muffled voice suddenly came from the direction of the room door. Li Yi held a stuffed bun wrapped in paper in his hand and one in his mouth. Seeing that Wan Ruoqing had woken up, he gestured to her and said, "I just bought these buns with cabbage fillings. Do you want two?" Wan Ruoqing looked at him in a daze. Her face was filled with amazement and shock. For a moment, she was unable to come back to her senses. After a while, she nodded and said, Then I'll have one." Li Yi was very clear on how long it would take for a person to wake up after their acupuncture point was hit. Therefore, when he came early in the morning, he bought breakfast for 2. Wan Ruoqing washed up for a long time before appearing in front of Li Yi again. She did not have any makeup on and her face was bare. She seemed to be in better spirits than last night. For a woman, someone who could meet her without makeup must have treated her as a true friend. Li Yi was very pleased about this, although he could not tell what had changed on her before and after putting on makeup. "Sorry, I didn't know that you don't eat cabbage buns. Xiao Zhu has already gone out to buy new ones." Just now, when Wan Ruoqing was washing up in the room, Xiao Zhu took a steamed bun and nibbled on it. When she realized that it was stuffed with cabbage, she told Li Yi that Wan Ruoqing never ate steamed buns with this kind of stuffing. She then went out to buy breakfast again. Actually, Li Yi did not like cabbage buns very much. Unfortunately, he had stayed up all night copying books and got up a little late in the morning. The bun shop had sold out the other fillings, so he had no other choice. Wan Ruoqing smiled and took a bite of a bun. After a while, she looked up at him and asked, When did you come back?" "Yesterday." Li Yi wiped his hands and said, "I came here last night. You were asleep at the time, so I didn't wake you up." Wan Ruoqing somewhat regretted not insisting a little longer yesterday, but she quickly changed the topic and said, "The theater." Seeing that she was going to talk about the theater, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about the theater for now. Rest well in the next few days. I'll take care of those things." The things he did related to the theater were only because he did not want to see the brothel close down at the time. He did not think about how big or how good it was. Although his thinking was different now, he could not make Ruoqing work so hard just because of this. Wan Ruoqing nibbled on the bun and did not know what to say for a moment. They had not seen each other for more than 2 months. She thought she would have a lot to say, such as asking how he was doing in the capital and if he would not come back in the future. However, when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she did not say them in the end. I advise you to let it go. That person is having fun in the capital. Maybe he has long forgotten about the things here. Zingzumo walked in from outside with a food box in her hand. She would persuade Wan Ruoqing like this several times a day, but today she closed her mouth before she finished speaking. Looking at the back of the figure sitting across from Wan Ruoqing, a trace of doubt and disbelief quickly flashed through her eyes. A moment later, Li Yi took a sip of the porridge Zingzumo brought over with a spoon. He looked up at her and asked, by the way, what did you say about having fun? Nothing. Seeing his indifferent look, Zingzumo gritted her teeth and said, Where did you buy the porridge today? Li Yi suddenly asked. What? Zingzumo turned to look at him, feeling a little nervous for no reason. Don't go to that store in the future. You can't even control the heat of ordinary porridge. Sooner or later, you will have to close, eat it or leave it. Zingzumo snatched the bowl from Li Yi's hand, put it back in the food box, and walked out angrily. What's wrong with her? Li Yi looked at Wan Ruoqing and asked in confusion. He did not offend her in any way today. Could it be that she was still holding a grudge over that misunderstanding? The first time they met was like this. Li Yi felt that the boat of friendship between the two might be overturned. Wan Ruoqing pondered for a moment and said, Nothing. It's just that the porridge just now was made by Zumo herself. Chapter 406. Maybe it's because of the 2 cabbage buns just now that affected my taste. Li Yi gulped down the plain porridge and said, from a gourmet point of view, it's best not to eat anything messy before tasting delicious food. This porridge is very good. It would be nice if there was another plate of pickled vegetables or pickled cucumbers. Without participation, there was no right to speak. If this porridge was sold, it would be fine. He could judge it after spending money. It was not the behavior of a gentleman to eat and drink someone else's porridge and complain that it tasted bad. Although Li Yi's definition of himself was not a gentleman, in order to save the boat of friendship between him and Zingzumo that was on the verge of collapse, he could only speak against his conscience. If Mississippi Lu was sent by God to go against him, making Li Yi feel that he owed her something in his previous life that needed to be repaid in this life, then Li Yi was extremely suspicious that Zingzumo had done something wrong to him in his previous life that caused him to ruin her things unintentionally every time. Before the two met, because of his negligence, he made a big mistake on the portrait of her and Mississippi Lu. Later, he was dragged to the Jade Courtyard by Li Xian for the first time and ruined her performance. Later, in order to avoid Mississippi Lu, he accidentally broke into her boudoir and saw everything that should not have been seen. In this way, she should have owed him a lot in his previous life. Of course, because of the last thing, when he faced Zingzumo, he actually felt a little guilty. In this era, if a man saw a woman's body, in order to keep her chastity, she would either marry him, kill him, or commit suicide. Of course, it was impossible to marry him. Li Yi estimated that with her arrogant personality, she would definitely look down on him. At the same time, for the sake of his and her safety, the probability of the first event happening was 0. However, she neither wanted to kill him, nor did she force him to do so. Not only did she not mention that incident, but she also helped him cover up the embarrassment in front of Mississippi Lu. A real man must take revenge and repay kindness. That was why he sent her poems to help her compete for the top courtesan before he left. However, the whole story had just been learned from Wan Ruoqing. Li Yi could only bury his head in the porridge. He didn't even have time to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. If Zingzumo hadn't redeemed her freedom before those poems were spread, she might still be in the fire pit of the Jade Yard. She might not even be able to get out for the rest of her life. That was to say, he almost accidentally caused a disaster again. Li Yi secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, Zingzumo had foresight. If she had redeemed herself a little later, he really wouldn't have been able to repay the debt in this life other than dedicating himself to her and giving her the only 100 kilograms of flesh he had. So, at that time, she didn't even think about competing for the top courtesan. He was being overly sentimental. Not only did he not repay the favor, but he owed her even more, making her the absolute goddess in the heart of Qing and prefecture and even everyone who heard those poems. The star of this era, the national goddess that countless people would spend a lot of money just to see once, was also in constant trouble. Every day, she had to face countless crazy bees and butterflies. She didn't even dare to go out without a mask and sunglasses. Li Yi decided not to speak for the time being to avoid embarrassment. The white porridge in the bowl was quickly finished. He seized the portion that originally belonged to Xiao Zhu, trying to use eating as an excuse to shut his mouth. The embarrassed expression on Xing Zumo's face eased slightly. She took this as a way for Li Yi to make amends. "I'm back. It's too late today, and a lot of porridge shops are sold out. I ran half a street to buy it." Xiao Zhu came in with a food box. Seeing that Li Yi was already sitting at the table eating porridge, and then looking at Xing Zumo sitting across from him, her little face couldn't help but change. However, when she learned that Li Yi had eaten up the portion that originally belonged to her, the smile on her face became bright again. She cast a grateful look at him. Finally, she had a good reason to eat the porridge she bought. In order to resolve the awkwardness between the two, Wan Ruoqing glanced at Xing Zumo and said to Li Yi, "During this time, Zumo has also helped us a lot. She helped to draw the curtains and backgrounds of some plays." Xing Zumo's power alone was limited. It was impossible for her to draw all the curtains and backgrounds of the theaters, but that kind of novel and unique painting had also attracted many customers for them. Xing Zumo curled her lips and said, "It's not really a help. It's just some useless painting. Besides, I get paid for painting those things." Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "A painting of the Luo Shui goddess has been sold for hundreds of taels of silver outside. There's no market for it. We can't afford such a high reward." Xing Zumo glanced at Li Yi. Speaking of which, the growth of her fame and the improvement of her painting skills were all thanks to him. However, although her paintings were very valuable now, it was nothing more than because they were rare. If they could be bought easily, then what was the difference between them and the common goods on the street? Moreover, she was not short of money at all, and did not need to sell her painstaking efforts. Li Yi was a little full now, but seeing Xing Zumo's appearance, he knew that the boat would not capsize this time. He suddenly felt that the 2 bowls of porridge just now were the 2 most meaningful bowls of porridge he had ever eaten. He came over in the morning to give the first few chapters of Journey to the West to Wan Ruoqing so that the storytellers could familiarize themselves with it first. The official serialization would begin tomorrow. At the same time, he hadn't been to the theater for a long time. He wanted to see what the theater was like now. "I'll take you there." The nearest theater was only a few dozen steps away from here. Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing walked out of the door and happened to meet a group of people coming from the front. Seeing those people, Xing Zumo, who was walking at the back, changed her expression. She was about to retreat, but it was too late. "Miss Zumo, what a coincidence." A young man at the front immediately greeted her and said with a smile, "So this is the Luo Shui goddess." "Indeed, seeing is believing. She is indeed a peerless beauty, Miss Zumo. I have set up a banquet at the Agarwood Tower today. I wonder if you can do me the honor." Most of these people were young men. After one of them took the lead, the others came forward one after another, talking politely and attentively. Some of them had seen Xing Zumo countless times. They tried to please her many times, but she didn't take them seriously. Some of them came purely because of her reputation. They felt that although this Luo Shui goddess was extremely beautiful, she didn't seem to be as exaggerated as described in the poem. She was not much better than this year's champion, Lu Chao Chao, and even comparable to the woman next to her. But since she was so famous and almost everyone in Qing and Prefecture knew her, there must be a reason. Thinking about it this way, it made them even more curious. Li Yi was also stunned by this sudden scene. It was one thing to hear Wan Ruoqing say it, but it was another thing to see Xing Zumo's pursuers with his own eyes. Who would have thought that in ancient times, there were fans of their idols who came to stop them? The young man looked talented and seemed to be well read, but he actually said such a lame reason like, what a coincidence. Die-hard fans really lowered their intelligence. As for the person who set up the banquet at the Agarwood Tower, who would treat their idols to a meal so casually, they should at least take out thousands of taels of silver to show their sincerity. Seeing this scene in front of him, an idea suddenly emerged in Li Yi's mind. If Xing Zumo's influence could spread to the capital and then put up a big billboard in front of every perfume shop, with a picture of Xing Zumo holding a perfume in her hands. It must be three-dimensional, and at the end, add an advertising slogan, XX perfume. Miss Zumo said it was good after using it. In this way, not only would women be unable to refuse, but it would also attract a large number of male customers. The business would be booming. Chapter 407. In this world, no one knew better than Li Yi how powerful the fan effect was. In the past, he thought that because of the background of the era, it was impossible to have a star model like the one in the future. However, seeing this scene today, he realized that this matter seemed to be very promising. Since there was a goddess of Luo Shui, why couldn't there be other goddesses like the goddess of Wei Shui, the goddess of Hanshan, and other goddesses? Of course, it was not easy to promote a national goddess like Xing Zumo, who had beauty, temperament, and a little luck. However, grassroots stars were closer to life. Sister Osmanthus Cake, Sister Grape Wine, Tofu Beauty, Sister Tanghulu, and these civilian goddesses could be achieved with a little hype. If not, he could let the brothel operate, and each state and county would elect a few state and county beauties. Then, he could push out a few newcomers signed by his family. Excellent actors not only relied on acting skills to make a living, but also had extremely high requirements for appearance. With a foundation, the event was held by his family, and the final right of interpretation was also up to him. As for the result, it was nothing more than a matter of going through the process. When he became famous, he could endorse for those rouge, cosmetics, jewelry, and the like, cut ribbons, attend commercial performances, and so on. This was all a business without any cost. By the way, he couldn't let go of the goddess of Luo Shui. He had to sign her first, lest others take advantage of her. She had a good relationship with Wan Ruoqing. When the time came, he could play the emotional card, and the possibility of success was not small. After all, the reputation of the goddess of Luo Shui was ready-made. There was no need to invest any resources. This was a big advantage. Those who always wanted to take advantage of others generally couldn't take advantage of others. Li Yi only understood this after a long time. At this time, he only felt a slight tightness on one arm, and he could feel the softness and smoothness through a layer of clothes. He looked at Xing Zumo, who came up to take his arm, and his brain was a little confused for a moment. What was going on? Watching the legendary goddess of Luo Shui, Miss Zumo, leave with a young man's arm, everyone stood there in a daze, unable to believe their eyes. Could it be that Miss Zumo was already taken? Except for husband and wife, who would do such a thing in public between a man and a woman? If heartbreak had a sound, Wan Ruoqing and Xiao Zhu would definitely feel that it was particularly noisy around them at this moment. However, they had no time to care about these people now. Seeing Li Yi and Xing Zumo leave, they hurriedly followed. Only the group of young people remained in the same place. They all had different expressions on their faces, but the one thing they had in common was that the smiles on their faces were no longer there. She hadn't said anything just now, but she had said everything. How is this possible? Who is that person? Why haven't I seen him before? She is Lady Zuemo, the goddess of Luo Shui. Many people were still unable to accept what they had just seen. Goddesses should exist high up in the clouds. Why did they have to descend to the mortal world all the time? A goddess marrying a man was a huge blow to them. It was likely that many people would leave the fan club because of this. Li Yi was stunned for a moment before he immediately understood what had happened. Of course, Xing Zumo couldn't have suddenly fallen in love with him and wanted to force a confession. The only explanation was that she wanted to get rid of these crazy bees and butterflies and used him as a shield. However, how could she not ask for his opinion? A shield also had dignity. Don't move. This is all your fault. It should be solved by you. Sensing that Li Yi wanted to pull his hand out, Xing Zumo whispered, and at the same time, she used some strength in her arm. Li Yi stopped moving around to avoid accidentally touching something he shouldn't. If he moved again in this position, Xing Zumo would definitely think that he wanted to take advantage of her. Fortunately, they were only a few dozen steps away from the theater. When the two walked in from the back door, Xing Zumo immediately let go of him. Wan Ruoqing walked over from behind and looked at Xing Zumo, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. She said, Forget it. This is indeed the most effective way. Seeing that Xing Zumo was actually looking at him proudly, Li Yi was quite speechless. If it was in modern times, it was not uncommon for girls to hug and kiss, let alone hold a shield's hand. This was how it was played in many TV dramas. The shield was generally a standard tall, rich, and handsome man with both looks and wealth. The female lead was a sweet and innocent girl who acted as a play for her ex-boyfriend or ex-boyfriend's current girlfriend or ex-boyfriend's current boyfriend. Then, under a miraculous fate, after 20 or 40 episodes of twists and turns, after experiencing all kinds of setbacks and blows, they would end up together with the original shield, making countless ignorant girls in front of the TV jealous. However, this was not modern times, nor was it an idle drama. Could it be that the shield had already appeared thousands of years ago? Moreover, the goddess of Luo Shui, who was equivalent to an A-list actress in Qing and Prefecture, was not a sweet and innocent girl with zero sense of existence. If there was a female star in the future who dared to do this, the man's ancestors would probably be dug out. On the second day of coming to Qing and Prefecture, Li Yi foresaw the trouble he was about to encounter. However, the most troublesome thing was not Xing Zumo's suitors, but how he should explain to Rui and Mississippi Lu's sword. Of course, the reason was still because of his decision 3 months ago. At this time, he could only slowly swallow the bitter fruit he had sown. Thank you for your kindness before, but this matter started because of you, so it should be ended by you. Anyway, you will leave soon. When you arrive in the capital, no one will know who Xing Zumo is. Xing Zumo turned to look at him, raised a white palm, and said, After today, our previous grievances are written off. Wan Ruoqing only knew that the two of them had never been on good terms, especially because of those poems. Xing Zumo had complained a lot in front of her in the past 2 months, although she could clearly see that her complaints were fake. More than once, she had seen her secretly looking at the poetry book with a silly smile. Li Yi knew that she was actually talking about something else. After hesitating for a moment, he also raised his palm. Paw. 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 No, there was only one sound. Paw. A high five as a vow. Xing Zumo raised her eyebrows. After giving Li Yi a high five, she turned around and walked further inside. Her footsteps were obviously relaxed. Li Yi shook his slightly numb palm, wondering why she had used so much strength just now. However, he also secretly breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that the boat had sailed to a calm sea, and there was no need to worry about turning over in a short time. In a room backstage of the theater, Old Sun put aside a stack of newly collected scripts and let out a long sigh. The previous scripts and stories were almost used up now. If they didn't innovate, the theater would gradually become deserted again. He absolutely didn't want to see that. However, the new scripts he saw recently were all old and boring, and none of them could be used. This serious problem was already imminent. However, the lack of a script was only a matter of urgency. There was another matter that was really urgent. The new county magistrate way was obviously not easy to deal with. How could they fight with the county magistrate in the territory of Anshi County after losing their backer? The sound of footsteps came from the door. Old Sun suppressed these emotions, turned his head, looked at the person, and said doubtfully, "Why is Miss Zumo here now?" "Miss Ruoching is not here now. I'm afraid you have to go home to find her." Before Zhang Zumo answered, two other figures walked in from the door. "Hey, Miss Ruoching is here. I happen to have something to talk to you about." Old Sun didn't finish his words. Looking at the young man who walked over side by side with Ruoching, he was stunned for a moment. The wrinkles on his old face were like blooming chrysanthemums. He said in surprise, "Sir, you're finally back." Chapter 408. Old Man Sun had personally witnessed the revival of this brothel and its gradual development to its current state. He could see gratifying changes almost every day, and all of this stemmed from the miraculous means of the person in front of him. As long as he came back, all the problems would be solved. Lack of new stories and scripts. Pressure from the local officials. He didn't have to worry about these. Under the guidance of Old Sun and Wan Ruoching, Li visited all the theaters in and outside the city in the morning. He even sat down with them to watch a few plays. Everything in the theater was orderly and well organized. It was a world of difference from the previous brothel. As the other theaters were too far away, Li didn't have time to visit them. As for the special performances for martial artists, they were far away outside the city. Naturally, he didn't have the chance to see them today. Along the way, Old Sun kept telling him about the development of the theater these days. The reputation of the Qing and prefectural theater had spread far and wide. There were more than 20 theaters, which almost included most of the actors living at the bottom of the society. Even actors from other states and counties came to seek shelter. However, because there were too many people, the theater couldn't accommodate them all. Now, they could only do some chores. As long as they could eat, it was good. Old Sun talked incessantly, "All of them are very grateful to you. They hope that we can bring the theater to other states and counties. There are countless actors living in poverty there. In the past, most of these actors worked alone. They built a small shed in Was City or formed a group. They could only rely on tips to survive. They had the last meal, but they didn't have the next one. They even wandered around the prefectures. Because of their lowly status, they couldn't do anything else. Their profession didn't allow them to live a stable life. Suddenly, there was such a place. They only had to do what they had always been doing. Their food and accommodation were provided and they were paid a lot. They didn't have to run around. Which actor wouldn't be tempted? The success of the Qing and prefectural theater was due to its high-quality content and scientific management methods. Both of these were things that other people could not learn or had a hard time learning. Thus, they hoped that the spring breeze of the reform of the brothels would blow to where they were and that they would stride into a beautiful new era. It had almost become the common hope of the performers in the nearby counties. At the mention of this matter, the weariness on Old Man Sun's face was swept away, and his muddy old eyes flashed with light. Years later, the actors who had gotten rid of their lowly status and could finally live under the gaze of thousands of people would never forget the words of the kind old man before he died. Life is but once for us, and a man's life should be spent in such a way that when he looks back on his past, he will not be ashamed of wasted years, nor will he be ashamed of meanness and vulgarity, so that at the moment of his death he will be able to say, "All my life and all my energies have been given to the greatest cause in the world, the struggle for the liberation of all actors." That old man was their enlightener, their forerunner. He would be remembered in history and become a god in the hearts of generations of actors. Li nodded. He agreed with Old Sun's words. Our goal is the Sea of Stars, the entire Jing Kingdom. Qing and Prefectural Theater isn't enough. I will stay here for the next few days and help you take care of things here. When this place is completely stabilized, some of us will continue to develop in the neighboring counties. The others will go to the capital. That will be our new starting point. The capital. Old Sun paused for a moment and nodded. He agreed with Li Yi's decision. Although Qing and Prefectural was prosperous, it couldn't compare to the capital. Furthermore, it was the capital of the Jing Kingdom. It had great significance. If they could take root in the capital and lead the trend, it would naturally be easier to infiltrate other places. Sir was indeed a Sir. His knowledge was far beyond what he could compare. Old Sun had already decided that he had to go to the capital personally. He had spent half his life wandering around. It made no difference to him whether it was Qing and Prefectural or the capital. Under these circumstances, he had to choose the place that needed him the most. Li Yi and Old Sun discussed the next step of the plan in more detail. Wan Ruoqing would sometimes express her opinion on the side. Suddenly, the three of them heard a strange sound at the same time. Li Yi turned his head and looked in the direction of the sound. Xing Zumo's pretty face was red. She never drank the porridge she cooked herself. She didn't eat anything in the morning, and she had been walking around with them for more than 4 hours. She was already tired and hungry. Speaking of which, I'm hungry too. Let's go eat first. Li Yi broke the awkwardness with one sentence. Okay, Xing Zumo said immediately. It's noon right now. The restaurant must be very busy. We can't find a place in a short time. It should be faster if we cook some simple dishes ourselves. Wan Ruoqing thought about it and suggested. Although Xing Zumo was very hungry, she thought that what she said made sense. She had to endure a little longer. Why don't we go to my house? Wan Ruoqing and Old Sun were both great contributors to the theater. They were the most important veterans. Li Yi felt that it would be more sincere to invite them to his house for dinner. Moreover, it would be more convenient to discuss the future development of the theater at home. As for Xing Zumo, it would be to repay her for the porridge in the morning. Let's go to the restaurant. Xing Zumo heard this and immediately shook her head. Wan Ruoqing hesitated and also said, why don't we go to my place? It might be more convenient. It's not convenient. There is no one at home anyway. I have to cook if I go back alone. Li Yi waved his hand and said, it's decided. Strangely, the two women didn't raise any objections this time. As for Old Sun, eating was a small matter for him. It didn't matter where they ate. He also wanted to talk to Li Yi about the development plan of the theater. He bought 2 candied haws on the roadside for Xing Zumo to eat first. On the way back, he also bought all the necessary ingredients. When the 4 people walked into the yard, Xing Zumo looked around. She only saw the girl named Yang Liuqing cleaning the yard. There was no one in the house. For some reason, her heart quietly relaxed. Uncle, you're back. Yang Liuqing put down the broom, first bowed to Li Yi, and then slightly gestured to Wan Ruoqing and the others. Some children worked in the theater. She naturally knew Old Sun and Wan Ruoqing. She had also seen Xing Zumo a few times, but she didn't talk much. Put these in the kitchen first. I'll go change clothes. Li Yi handed the things in his hand to her, then turned to Wan Ruoqing and said, you guys do as you please. You must be tired after walking all morning. Go inside and rest for a while. I'll come out soon. They were all old friends, so there was no need for formalities. Wan Ruoqing and Sing Zumo were already used to him being like this. It was old Sun who looked a bit restrained. You guys go in and rest. I'll go help in the kitchen. Seeing Yang Liuqing enter the kitchen with the dishes, Wan Ruoqing also followed. I'll go too. Sing Zumo thought about it and immediately followed. Old Sun, of course, would not join in the fun. He sat on a stone bench in the yard, looking at the distant sky, and fell into deep thought. His Excellency was right. He had to look further. The capital was a new and most suitable starting point. Their ultimate goal was not Qing and prefecture or the capital, but the entire Jing kingdom. Even other countries could be considered. Chapter 409. Seeing that Li Yi had changed his clothes and walked out of the room, Old Sun immediately greeted him. In just a short while, he had formed a few preliminary ideas in his mind. Old Sun, you rest first. I will go and cook. If there is anything, we will talk about it later. Seeing Wan Ruoqing's figure appearing in the kitchen, Li Yi waved his hand and then walked to the kitchen. Here, he was the host, and Wan Ruoqing and the others were guests. There was no reason for the host to let the guests cook at home. Cook? Old Sun was stunned in place. How could a man do a woman's thing? In his heart, Li Yi was a godlike man. Imagine the scene of his god wearing an apron, humming a tune in the kitchen and chopping pig bones. He was old and couldn't bear such a psychological gap for a while. The dull expression on Old Sun's face did not recover for a long time. Not seeing Old Sun, who was stunned, Li Yi walked into the kitchen and saw Yang Liuqing and Wan Ruoqing busy at the stove. Sing Zumo squatted down and peeled a good green onion into pieces. Li Yi hurriedly grabbed it from her hand. From the bowl of porridge she cooked in the morning, it could be seen that this Miss Zumo was the same as his second Mississippi. They were both little fairies who did not do any chores. Fairies should be floating in the sky. Such vulgar words as peeling green onions to cook were not suitable for fairies. Okay, you go outside and rest. We will be fine here. Li Yi waved his hand at her. It was enough to have Wan Ruoqing and Yang Liuqing to help. He didn't know how long it would take for him to cook a meal for 5 people. He had to find 2 people to help. There was no need to talk about Wan Ruoqing. Since the osmanthus cake was so delicious, how could her culinary skills be bad? As a wandering heroine, Yang Liuqing's ability to survive was definitely much better than ordinary people. It was not a problem for her to help out a little. At least, she would not peel a green onion until it was only as long as a little finger. Sing Zumo was a little annoyed to see him chasing away flies. She crossed her arms and stood to the side. She wanted to see how a man like him did these kitchen things. He had reached the pinnacle of both the Tao of poetry and the Tao of painting. Being able to see a side that he was not good at made him feel quite satisfied. However, it didn't take long for her to disappear. As a woman, she couldn't help but feel ashamed. Even Wan Ruoqing was a little surprised. She knew that Li Yi often cooked, and his culinary skills should be passable. He could even make a bowl of ordinary porridge with endless aftertaste. However, when she saw his exquisite and somewhat exaggerated knife skills and skilled movements, she couldn't help but feel inferior. Yang Liuqing had stayed here for a long time, so she was not too surprised. If she was allowed to do it, she could cut it faster and better, although the taste was not comparable at all. Sing Zumo didn't watch for long and walked out in shame. As a woman, it was not something to be proud of to be defeated by a man in a place where she should be proud. Steaming and boiling were still the mainstream diet of ordinary people, but it was not the case in Li Yi's family. Since they were not short of money, stir-frying with iron wok replaced those two simple cooking methods. Thus, Singzumo smelled the aroma coming from the kitchen in the yard. She was already very hungry, and she almost involuntarily swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, she felt that this action seemed very spineless, so she involuntarily swallowed a mouthful of saliva again. In the past, in the jadeite courtyard, other than sometimes involuntarily singing and performing, she didn't have to worry about anything else. As the top artist of the jadeite courtyard, the madam would naturally have people serve her very well. However, after redeeming herself and moving out, she and Xiao Chui had to personally handle all the big and small things, including clothing, food, housing, and transportation. The trifling matters were still manageable, but the 3 meals a day couldn't be bought from a restaurant every time. However, she and Xiao Cui really didn't know anything about cooking, so they could only practice diligently, surrounding the stove for several hours a day. Fortunately, she was naturally intelligent, and after a few days, she finally understood that going to elder sister Ruoqing's place for a meal was the best solution. At this moment, smelling the fragrance in the air, she stared blankly at the direction of the kitchen, and her thoughts inevitably drifted away. A moment later, Singzumo pinched her arm to expel that unrealistic thought from her mind. Wan Ruoqing and Yang Liuqing were in the kitchen. They helplessly found that other than picking the onions, peeling the garlic, and occasionally passing seasonings to him, they couldn't do anything else. No, they could still carry the plates. Every time Li Yi finished a dish, he would ask them to bring it out. After a short time, 4 hot dishes, 4 cold dishes, and 1 soup, were all finished. A total of 8 dishes and 1 soup. It was already a very high standard to entertain guests. The square table was just enough for 4 people, but with the addition of Yang Liuqing, the 3 women were all skinny, so it didn't seem crowded even with 5 people. You guys have worked hard these days. I'll drink first to show my respect. Li Yi raised his cup to Wan Ruoqing and Oldman Sunday. Without them, there wouldn't be the current theater, and his plan wouldn't have been possible. This cup should be a toast. Of course, because most of the people sitting here were women, his cup was actually tea. However, a toast was the same. The details weren't important. Master, you're too kind, too kind. Oldman's son hurriedly raised his cup in return. His dreams and wishes could be realized all because of Li Yi's support. How hard was it to realize a dream? Singzumo looked at the table full of delicious food and secretly swallowed a lot of saliva. She had been hungry for a long time, but she couldn't eat in front of so much food. It was a double mental and physical torture. This cup is for the future of the theater. This cup is for ourselves. Hearing these words, Singzumo's face turned a little pale. Couldn't they toast after eating? They could toast while eating. Okay, the food will be cold in a while. Let's eat. Finally hearing these words from Li Yi's mouth, Singzumo couldn't wait to pick up her chopsticks. Hubby, is there a guest? Rui walked in from the door and looked at the situation in the room with a slightly startled expression. Mississippi Lu, who followed in, didn't have any expression, but the little maid on the side couldn't help but change her expression after seeing Singzumo. Wasn't the painting that the son-in-law hid that woman? Singzumo's already extended chopstick stopped in midair. In an instant, she felt that her entire life had become a lot darker. Chapter 410. Singzumo swore that except for the half-moldy steamed bun that she picked up in the kitchen after being hungry for 3 days in the musical house when she was a child, this was the most delicious meal she had ever eaten in her life. Sister Ruoqing's cooking was also very delicious, but it seemed that today's was more suitable for her taste. For this reason, she was a little, very envious of Li Yi's wife, even the little maid. When she was very young, even if there was only one unmoldy steamed bun to eat, she would feel very happy, thinking that it would be good if her whole life could be like today. Later, she was chosen by the Madam of the Jade Courtyard, who took her to Qing and Mansion. Since then, she never lived such a hard life again. As the top artist of the Jade Courtyard and the money tree of the Madam, she naturally had no lack of luxurious clothes and good food, and was pursued by countless people. However, after that, no delicacy, for her, could compare with half a moldy steamed bun. So Li Yi was very curious why she could have tears in her eyes when eating a meal. Was it because the food he cooked was so delicious that she couldn't help being moved to tears? Li Yi felt that this was the greatest respect for the fruits of his labor, much more than Mississippi Lu's behavior of robbing him of food every time. So when Xing Zuma was about to leave, Li Yi also invited her to visit his home when she was free. After living 2 lives, this was the most fulfilling cooking experience for him. Of course, this time, Mississippi Lu did not rob him, because she, Rui, and Xiao Huan did not sit at the same table with him and others. Yang Liuqing also went to their table. Li Yi happened to be discussing the theater with Old Sun and Wan Ruoqing during the meal. Your Excellency, after I go back, I will try to interview in several theaters according to what we just discussed. Old Sun's focus was not on whether the food was delicious or not, but on the matter of the brothel. This matter is not urgent. I will write a few news stories in these days, and when we attract enough guests, the effect will be better. Old Sun nodded repeatedly and asked tentatively, then, what about Master Wei? Li Yi smiled and said, just do what you need to do. I'll take care of the rest. With Li Yi's words, Old Man Sun was finally reassured. This meant that an Anxi County magistrate wasn't worthy of the Lord's attention. With such a background, the development of the brothel would definitely be much smoother. After sending them off, Li Yi lay on the rocking chair in the courtyard alone. While closing his eyes to rest, he was also thinking about something. The brothels in Qing and Fu were actually just an unintentional decision he had made a few months ago. At the time, he did have the idea of creating something like the entertainment industry in ancient times, but it was only to satisfy some of his interests. However, he gradually realized that the purpose of the brothel seemed to be more than just entertainment. It could also be used for many other things. It was like an invisible blunt knife. It looked rusty but hid a dazzling sharpness. The trip to the capital made him more aware that he needed to do something or prepare something. Although the token in his arms was useful, it was not his. Others could take it back with a word or a thought. How could he have peace of mind when he had something that truly belonged to him? Wulin Hero Ranking, Wulin, Jianghu, Li Yi's index finger lightly tapped on the armrest of the rocking chair. At this moment, no one, including himself, knew that the words he was muttering in the courtyard would stir up the entire Jianghu of the Jing kingdom in the near future, to the extent that the world would be turned upside down. At this moment, Xiao Huan was helping Rui clean up the dishes in the kitchen. From time to time, she would poke her head out to take a look. Only when she saw the son-in-law alone in the courtyard did she feel relieved. Slightly further away from Li Yi, the sword in Yang Liuqing's hand danced. Mississippi Lu stood to the side and watched. Occasionally, she would open her mouth to give him a few pointers. Every time this happened, a look of joy would appear on Yang Liuqing's face. In just a moment, the sword's light would become even sharper. 2 branches of red apricot peeked over the wall and into the courtyard. The leaves rustled in the breeze. The warm breeze was pleasant and refreshing. Li Yi turned over and immediately felt much more comfortable. He then remembered that it had been a long time since he had felt so comfortable. Not long after he closed his eyes, the familiar drowsiness of noon hit him. His perception of his surroundings gradually disappeared. At this time, it was the 2nd year of Jinghe, 10th of April, spring. In Qing and Prefecture, for most people, they might not know who the magistrate was, or who the prefectural magistrate was. They might not even know who the emperor was. This was because it was too distant for them. However, it was impossible for them not to know who the Luo Shui goddess was. Those poems were really too famous. Especially when the Luo Shenfu was released, it caused countless people to fight to copy it. This indirectly caused the price of paper in Qing and Prefecture to increase by more than 20%. Many paper shops and printing shops became rich because of this. Naturally, they were grateful to the goddess of Luo Shui and the #1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture, who was famous but never seen. The gifted scholars marveled at the attainments of the poems themselves, and regarded the chance encounter with the beauties described in the poems as a matter of elegance. After this incident, the reputation of the Jade Courtyard's leading courtesan became even greater. Even those who had not been educated wanted to see what the woman, who was rumored to be like a fairy from heaven, looked like. They could not see the fairies in heaven, but could they not see the Luo Shui goddess who had come down to earth? The fame of the Luo Shui goddess was not only limited to men. In Qing and Prefecture, whether it was a young lady from a noble family or a village woman, who did not want to see her. They were all women. Those who had the slightest bit of confidence in their looks all wanted to compare with the Luo Shui goddess. Where were they lacking? Of course, there were also smart people like the 10 top courtesans who understood that they were lacking compared to Xing Zumo. One was the #1 scholar in Qing and Prefecture, and the other was the #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom. In short, the former top courtesan of the Jade Courtyard, the Luo Shui goddess Xing Zumo, had been the topic of conversation in Qing and Prefecture and the focus of everyone's attention. 2 months ago, everyone thought that she had an extremely ambiguous relationship with the #1 scholar in Qing and Prefecture. Otherwise, why would he write such a poem for her? However, after 2 months of observation, everyone was surprised to find that no one of the opposite sex had ever appeared by Xing Zumo's side. For most people, this was, without a doubt, great news. In particular, those self-proclaimed romantic geniuses or noble young masters who had a bit of confidence in their looks suddenly became the lascivious bees and butterflies around the Luo Shui goddess. They tried to win over the Luo Shui goddess who had fallen to earth. Even the son of the county magistrate was no exception. However, after so many days had passed, it seemed that no one had won the Luo Shui goddess's heart. The Luo Shui goddess hadn't even attended a single banquet. This news was neither good nor bad. They didn't get to pick the peach, at least others didn't get to taste it either. Everyone's hearts were balanced. However, at this time, an unknown fellow who blocked their way out of nowhere had snatched away the peach that they had been yearning for. How could they not be angry? For a moment, the guy whose name was unknown immediately became the public enemy of all men in Qing and Prefecture after the news spread. Chapter 411. Is there any news? Who on earth is he? I heard from the people I saw that day that the man looks unfamiliar. He doesn't seem to be very famous in the Qing and Prefecture. Could it be that he isn't from the Qing and Prefecture? This is outrageous. The Luo Shui goddess belongs to the Qing and Prefecture. How can she be taken away by an outsider? In just 2 days, topics such as, who on earth is the mysterious man beside the Luo Shui goddess, and, what is the relationship between the outsider and the Luo Shui goddess, immediately became the hot topic of discussion. The speed at which it spread was enough to make people dumbfounded. In fact, the focus of people's discussion was no longer on Xing Zumo. The man who appeared beside her that day was the focus of the public's opinion. Investigate. We must find out who he is. In a gorgeous mansion, a young nobleman ordered several servants. It's impossible for him to suddenly appear beside Lady Zumo. There must be something we don't know. Go and investigate. Humph. Apart from me, who else is worthy of the Luo Shui goddess? No matter who that person is, I will make him regret it. Messages and orders came from all corners, and countless pairs of eyes stared at Sing Zumo's residence. However, other than occasionally seeing her go out to the theater or go to another woman's residence, they didn't find anything suspicious. The man seemed to appear out of thin air and then disappeared into thin air, completely disappearing from everyone's sight. Li Yi didn't disappear. In order to write the Jing Kingdom's version of Journey to the West and the Legend of the Condor Heroes as soon as possible, he almost didn't go out for the past few days. He edited, combined with the real history of this world, and removed the parts that were easy to be harmonized. There was a lot of work to be done. Even his daily sunbathing time was compressed to half an hour. Maybe it was because he hadn't tried to work so hard for a long time. After a few days, he felt that his body couldn't bear it. Thinking that Wan Ruoqing had persisted for more than 2 months in a more difficult and tiring situation than him, a man who could be regarded as a low-level martial artist in the martial arts world couldn't compare with a weak woman, he couldn't help but feel ashamed. At this moment, he planned to go to Huichen Hall to buy some ingredients for making medicinal cuisine. The recipe for the medicinal cuisine was found by him after looking through many books. He would give it to Xiao Zhu later and ask her to nourish Wan Ruoqing's body during this period. After all, the future development of the theater couldn't do without her. The reason why he chose to go to Huichen Hall was because it was the nearest medicine shop. Secondly, he didn't have to pay there. When he taught the suturing technique to Dr. Qin from Huichen Hall, Dr. Qin said that in order to thank him for his selfless contribution, the medicine hall would not charge him a single cent as long as he came to visit them in the future. Only by being careful could he live a long life. Although he didn't have much money, as a man who knew how to live, he should save where he could, right? The door of the medicine shop was open. Li Yi took out the recipe for the medicinal cuisine from his arms and walked in. "Doctor, how is my eldest brother's injury?" In Huichen Hall, a strong man grabbed Dr. Chen's arm and said, Don't worry. Let me go first." Dr. Chen struggled to get rid of the man's hand. He stood up and said, "His external injuries are not serious. He will recover after a few days of rest. But the internal injury he suffered is quite serious. I'm afraid it will take him a long time to recuperate." "A long time to recuperate? That is to say, my eldest brother won't die?" The strong man pondered over Dr. Chen's words. After a moment, his face lit up and he grabbed Dr. Chen's hand again and asked. Dr. Chen shook off his hand again. With one hand behind his back, he raised his head and looked like a lonely master. He said, "Who am I? It's just a small injury. Of course, it won't be fatal." That's great." The strong man cried out in surprise. Then he thought of something and said angrily, "Those quacks said that even immortals couldn't save my eldest brother. They are all useless. Dr. Chen's medical skills are better." As a doctor, Dr. Chen was very happy to be praised by a patient. A smile also appeared on his old face. Glancing at the middle-aged man who was lying on the bed, his complexion much better than before, he secretly felt that it was not time for him to die. If he had come a few months earlier, he was afraid that he would have ended up the same as the quack that the man had mentioned. He could only come to the conclusion that even a deity would not be able to save him. What kind of divine person could come up with a method to stitch up people's wounds like a bag? It seemed incredible, but it could save people in times of crisis. He went to the capital once and personally handed this method to the imperial physician. When he left the capital, the imperial physician had already decided to promote this method to the world. If all the doctors in the world could learn this method, how many lives would be saved and how much good karma would be created? Even if 1 in 10,000 of them were to fall on him, it would be enough to protect him from illness and disaster for several lifetimes. "Thank you, divine doctor. Thank you." Just when Dr. Chen was distracted, the man had already knelt on the ground and kowtowed to him. It was a doctor's duty to treat and save people. Dr. Chen hurriedly bent down to help him up. However, the man was so strong that he could not move him at all even when he used all his strength. Seeing a figure enter Huichan Hall, Dr. Chen was stunned for a moment and immediately said, "Don't thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank that lord." The suturing technique used to save your elder brother's life was suggested by that lord. Although the man's brain was not good enough most of the time, it was not to the extent that he could not understand this sentence. He turned around and was about to speak when he saw the young man standing in front of him. He was stunned for a moment and blurted out the word benefactor. Li Yi was also stunned. As soon as he walked into the medicine shop, someone bowed to him. What was even more unexpected was that the guy kneeling on the ground was the stupid and cute mountain bandit who wanted to rob him a few days ago but was mercilessly humiliated by Mississippi Liu. He looked at Dr. Chen with a puzzled expression. His meaning was obvious. What was the situation in front of him? The process of the matter was not complicated. After Dr. Chen explained a few words, Li Yi finally figured out the situation. It turned out that a few days ago, after the man was rejected by several doctors in the city, he carried his injured brother and came to him. If it was a few months ago, he did not know how to suture wounds. In order to avoid trouble, he might have told the man to go back and prepare for his funeral. However, things had changed. Dr. Chen was now a first-class divine doctor in the eyes of everyone. He disinfected, sterilized, and sutured the wound. After this set of procedures, he finally brought the man back from the gates of hell. Hence, the scene of the man kowtowing today. However, Dr. Chen knew better than anyone else that although he was the one who saved the man, the person this man should thank the most should be Li Yi. Benefactor, we owe you our lives. After knowing the truth, the man patted his chest and said with a serious expression, "If you have any errands in the future, just let me know. I won't frown even if I have to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a sea of flames." Li Yi thought to himself, how is this owing a life? If it weren't for your stupidity, you would have died under Mississippi Liu's sword a few days ago when you blocked the road to rob him. How would you have the chance to kneel here and kowtow? Chapter 4:12. You don't have to, Li Yi waved his hand. Why would he need someone to climb a mountain of swords and plunge into a sea of flames for him? Even if he did, he wouldn't dare to ask this silly, cute man to do it. His ability to do bad things was definitely much stronger than his ability to do good things. The person lying on the bed was a rather thin middle-aged man. His face was thin, and he looked somewhat similar to the burly man. Perhaps it was because he was injured, but his face was slightly pale. After the burly man spoke, he also spoke, "My younger brother is slow-witted. If he has offended you in any way, I apologize on his behalf." The middle-aged man spoke politely and properly. He didn't seem to have the same parents as the stupid man at all. Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's not that I've offended you. It's just that I need to be more familiar with the official language in the future so that I can disguise myself as a bandit. I've already memorized it. If you don't believe me, I'll recite it for you." When the big man heard this, he said with some dissatisfaction, "Listen, benefactor. I planted this mountain, and I opened this tree." Li Yi was starting to wonder if the two of them were really twins, but the distribution of the brain during the embryonic stage was not very balanced. This man had obviously only received a small portion of the brain, but his body had been compensated. He was much more muscular than his elder brother. It was a surprise to see the two brothers here. He still had serious things to do. He explained the purpose of his visit to Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen immediately ran to the counter to get the medicine and asked if he could keep a copy of the prescription for the medicinal diet for later study. It was just an ordinary medicinal diet prescription. In the future, there were all kinds of dietary supplements that could be found everywhere. Li Yi had just picked one out of them. Perhaps any old Chinese medicine doctor's prescription was not worse than this one. If he wanted to study it, let him be. Watching Li Yi take the medicine and leave Huichun Hall, the big man's expression was a little regretful. He was not a person who didn't know how to repay kindness. On the contrary, if he received kindness from others for no reason, he would always feel depressed if he didn't return it quickly. However, they didn't need him at all, which made him very depressed. After a while, the big man seemed to think of something. He took out an ingot of silver from his arms and put it on the counter. He said to Dr. Chin, "This is the medicine fee for the next few days. If it's not enough, I'll think of another way." Dr. Chin smiled and pushed the silver back and said, "Since you're a friend of young Lord Li, if I accept the silver, I'm afraid I'll be punished. In the future, you can take the medicine and boil it here. Don't mention the medicine fee again." Huichun Hall had been open for dozens of years, so it must have accumulated a lot of money. Dr. Chin was not short of these few taels of silver. For him, because he had personally offered his miraculous skill, he had received a promise from the imperial physician, which was far more important than a few hundred or a few thousand taels of silver. Soon, he would hand over Huichun Hall to his disciple. He would go to the capital again and learn medical skills from Lord Liu. If he could achieve great medical skills in his lifetime and enter the Imperial Physician's Bureau to work, he would have no regrets even if he died. The middle-aged man slowly sat up from the bed. He had always been decisive, so he didn't refuse. Even if he wanted to repay the kindness, the prerequisite was that his body could recover. He smiled and said, "I am greatly indebted to you, but I don't know your identity. I'm really ashamed. I wonder if Dr. Chin can tell me." The middle-aged man was obviously very talkative. When the two of them talked, the big man felt a little bored. He scratched his ears and cheeks, feeling very uncomfortable. There were experts competing in the theater outside the city today. Both of them were rare experts on the heavenly list. He didn't know if the hero's ranking in heavenly list would change after today. If he could go and watch the show, how good it would be. Under Li Yi's arrangements, Wan Ruoqing didn't have much to do these few days. Other than occasionally going to the brothel, she stayed at home to read the two books, Journey to the West, and The Legend of the Condor Heroes. She wasn't very interested in the latter, but she heard from Old Sun that the book was very well received in the theaters outside the city. When the storytellers told the stories, the theaters were almost full, and most of them were people from the martial arts world. Old Sun had always been in charge of matters related to the martial arts world. She spent most of her time on the former. Obviously, this story had a wider audience and was suitable for almost all theaters. When they received a story, they would first spread it around through the storyteller. As time passed and the popularity of the story died down, they would then adapt it into a play. Any guest who had heard the story would almost never miss out on these plays, and the theater would thus welcome a second wave of customers. However, this wasn't all. For example, all the stories in Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio had been printed into books through the printing workshop. They were very popular in Qing and Prefecture and were always in short supply. There were also picture books adapted from the stories, and even snacks sold in the theater. These were all extensions of the theater's business. In her free time, she would occasionally think about how the brothel, which had only had a dozen people and was struggling to survive, almost falling apart, had grown into such a colossus in such a short period of time. Originally, she just wanted to live with Yuzhu in Qing and Prefecture. Even if they weren't rich, they could still get by. She never thought that a day would come where she could decide the fate of countless actors with a single thought. She didn't lack in material things, but she needed to be more careful with every step she took. As she was thinking about these things, Xiao Zhu came bouncing in from outside. She waved the thing in her hand and said, "Sister Ruoqing, guess what this is?" Wan Ruoqing didn't answer because she knew that with Xiao Zhu's personality, she would definitely say it in the next moment. This is the medicine that Li Li just sent over. He said it's for some kind of medicinal cuisine. Xiao Zhu put the thing in her hand on the table and said, "This time, he told me to take good care of you. You're not allowed to sleep late, and you're not allowed to care about the things in the theater. You just have to take care of your body." The young girl said with a smile, "Don't worry, I'll definitely raise you until you're fair and fat. Otherwise, how can I be worthy of the salary he paid me?" With that, she picked up the things on the table again and ran to the kitchen. "Let me do some research first. What exactly is this medicinal cuisine?" Wan Ruoqing stood up and walked into the courtyard. She stretched her body. Outside the courtyard walls, there were flowing clouds floating in the sky. Separated by a wall, the sound of two people coughing could be heard. "Miss, it's burnt again." The young girl coughed as she said, "Miss, forget it. You can't make this. Let's go out and buy it. Or we can go to Miss Ruoqing's place to eat." Drunk Immerse seemed to have been stimulated a few days ago and became even more passionate about the kitchen. However, although her painting skills were superb and her singing skills were also extraordinary, she didn't seem to have much talent in cooking. After a few days, not only did she not improve at all, but her ability to make that little courtyard a mess was increasing day by day. "Today's dishes, as usual, I have to make more." Thinking this in her heart, she walked towards the kitchen. "These are all groundless rumors. Can you believe them?" Li Yi rolled his eyes at Mississippi Lu and pushed the little servant girl's pitiful head to the side. "But, the people outside are saying, and..." Xiao Huan's face was bitter. The people outside were saying that the goddess of Luo Shui already had someone she liked, and the person she liked was the #1 scholar in Qing and Prefecture. Wasn't that the son-in-law? There was another half of the sentence that she didn't say. The person in the painting that the son-in-law still hid in the room was that person. Rumors, they're all rumors. Li Yi shook his head and said, "In the past, I owed someone a favor. I wanted to write a few poems to repay it, but I didn't expect that it would be misinterpreted by others and become like this. Rumors are fiercer than tigers. In the future, don't believe them so easily." "What favor?" Mississippi Lu was always able to grasp the main point in time. He couldn't tell Mississippi Lu in front of her that if she hadn't disguised herself as a man to check the jade yard, he wouldn't have owed her this favor. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "What favor is not important? Think about it. Who is the goddess of Luo Shui? She is the most beautiful woman in Qing and Prefecture. She is the goddess in the hearts of all men. The number of men chasing after her can line up from Rui Square to outside the prefectural city. How could it be possible?" If he continued, it would seem like he was belittling himself. Li Yi looked at them and said, "Furthermore, these few months, we haven't been in Qing and Prefecture. You don't believe your own eyes and actually believe those street rumors." "I knew the son-in-law wouldn't." The little servant girl's eyes immediately turned into crescent moons and dimples appeared at the corner of her mouth. Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and felt that what Li Yi said was very reasonable. She then looked at him and asked, "The most beautiful woman in Qing and Prefecture?" He shouldn't have said all this to them just now, especially to Mississippi Lu. He didn't even know what she was focused on. He had to go and talk to Rui. It was time to discipline this sister of hers. Rui's skills. Rui was tidying up her clothes in the room. She looked at Li Yi, who was leaning against the door, and thought for a moment. She said, "Although Rui is young, she is very talented in martial arts. With her current strength, as long as she doesn't encounter a grandmaster, she can basically be in a position of invincibility. However, because of her age and experience, she actually doesn't have much experience in fighting. If she meets an experienced master at the same level, she may be at a disadvantage. Are there many Grandmaster Masters in the martial arts world? Li thought for a moment and asked. Ri smiled and shook her head. She said, the threshold to become a Grandmaster is very high. In the martial arts world, including those martial arts seniors who are not well known, the number of Grandmasters can be counted with 2 hands. Moreover, when martial arts reach that level, they have already returned to their original state and their state of mind will also improve. They rarely fight with others, so the possibility of meeting them is too small. With this, Li Yi was relieved. In other words, below the Grandmaster level, with Mississippi Lu's strength, she could be proud in the martial arts world. And those who could beat her were definitely rare in this world. The probability of meeting them was not much higher than winning the lottery. Then let her be. Mississippi Lu always had excess energy. It was better to find a place for her to vent than to let her find trouble with him. The Wulin Hero list, produced by the theater, now had a lot of credibility and authority in the martial arts world and was recognized by many people in the martial arts world. Of course, after a few months, the current rankings had already undergone earth-shattering changes. Naturally, there was no change in the Grandmaster list. Those mysterious martial arts legends had long been recognized by the public. No one would be confident enough to challenge the names on the list. However, the Heaven ranking was just below the Grandmaster ranking and was also the most important and eye-catching ranking of the Wulin Hero ranking. It changed almost every few days, and new names would appear on it from time to time. The original rankings on it were also constantly changing. The martial arts competition in the martial arts world was popular because of this list. Everyone was proud of having a ranking on the hero list. Every day, there were people in the theater who would classify and organize the information collected to ensure the timeliness and fairness of the list. There were even storytellers who turned the ranking battles into wonderful stories. Those in the martial arts world who did not have the chance to see the battle with their own eyes were also satisfied. It also made Oldman's son and the others count money until their hands were cramping. However, no matter how the ranking on the list changed, the first place of the Heaven list still belonged to a woman. Although that position originally represented strength and status, when other people increased their ranking through battle after battle, they never saw the first place of the Heaven list. Even when someone announced that they wanted to challenge the first place never responded. As time went on, naturally, there would be many discordant voices. Especially those who were ranked at the top, they probably had some complaints. Some people even secretly talked about the shady business of the list, saying that the first place of the Heaven list did not live up to its name and should be replaced as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be unfair. Mississippi Lu heard 2 people in the martial arts world talking about this when she was shopping one day. At the same time, it was also the first time she heard that the theater outside the city actually provided a place for martial arts people to compete and learn from each other. The ranking was determined by victory and defeat. She had long been dissatisfied with the fact that her name was not on the list. The next day, she single-handedly defeated the 9th place of the Heaven list, a master who happened to be in Qing and Prefecture. She entered the top 10 of the Heaven list in her first battle. Ever since the World of Martial Arts Hero Ranking Board was released, there would be an unknown dark horse who would appear once every few days. They would defeat powerful players who had been famous for a long time and charge into everyone's sights, but this was the first time someone had defeated someone in the top 10 of the Heaven Ranking Board. Considering that the 9th place did not even last for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn before he surrendered, the person in charge of adjusting the ranking temporarily put her in the 5th place. It was also at this time that the people knew her name. Lu Ri. They were both extremely skilled in martial arts, had a similar name, and were both in Qing and Prefecture. They would not believe that she did not have a relationship with the first place of the Heaven list, Lu Ri. This news was quickly verified. This time, no one said that the first place of the Heaven list was undeserved. The younger sister was so powerful, how bad could the older sister be? If anyone still had doubts, they would first defeat the 5th place of the heaven list. The reason why she was ranked 5th was because the 3 people in front of her were not in Qing and Prefecture. Perhaps even those 3 did not have absolute confidence in defeating her. There was no need for the theater to deliberately promote her. This heroine Lu, who came out of nowhere and had both beauty and strength, became the hot topic of discussion in Jianghu in a few short days. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.